The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Well, hello. Good evening, everybody. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and we are back for another episode of Hayes Reviews. That's the channel, that's the show, and what we do here is we live stream and we read books because why not? What else are you going to do? I mean, it's not like there's some big decision being made out there with regards to who's going to be in charge of the country for the next foreseeable future, is there? It's not like there's anything good on television these days. It's not like there's anything good on the radio. The weather's terrible. What are you going to do except tune in to Hayes Reviews and watch me read books? But seriously though, welcome. If you're here on the live or if you're watching on the replay, I'm very grateful and glad to have you along for this learning journey. Just a reminder, if you are watching on the replay, then you can use the pinned comment underneath the video to navigate ahead to the book reading itself if you just want to get straight into the meat of things. If you're watching live, you do not have that functionality. We haven't invented time travel yet, as I like to say. But I'm very happy to have you here, and I'm very glad to be back. Tonight, we are continuing with our reading of The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin. This is a 1953 book, gives us an insight into the kind of mentality, the mindset, the worldview, and the way of thinking that the kind of people who feel themselves the best among us, and the kind of people who feel themselves to be the leaders and the controllers of the world. This is the kind of worldview that they have. These are the kind of problems that they think about, keep them up at night when they're trying to go to sleep in their huge houses on their vast estates of land that us peons and peasants and plebs are not allowed to have access to. They're lying in bed going, there's a bit too many of those peons and plebs out there. How can we get the numbers to a level that's manageable? How can we make sure the ones that do remain are obedient and don't fight back and organize themselves and throw off their chains of oppression and control, or reform the institutions that they live within in order to make them actually benefit and serve the populations who are living underneath them? How do we prevent that from happening? And they scratch their heads and they come up with all these plans and ideas, and they put them in books. And they can get away with this because not many people read those books. But I'm here to correct that. It is my mission. It is what I care about. It's what I'm passionate about. And it's what I think really benefits people. So not only do I love books and enjoy collecting them and reading them and learning about what's in them, I also feel like I could do a bit of a service to other people who maybe they don't have the time, the energy, the attention, the finances. Maybe they don't have the access to get hold of some of these books. Maybe they're not aware of some of these books, Certainly from my point of view, the last 4 years has been a bit of a whirlwind of awakening as I have come to discover the contents in books written by people such as H.G. Wells, such as the Huxleys, both Aldous and Julian Huxley. We've got people such as Bertrand Russell, I mention him all the time on the channel. But then even the contents of books like, for example, Charles Darwin. He wrote some horrific things about Irish people. And I know we have at least one person in the audience out there tonight in Ireland. I myself, I'm a quarter Irish on my mother's side. And Charles Darwin wrote a book, I think it's The Descent of Man. And in that, he puts the Irish people basically at the bottom of the hierarchy. He makes a hierarchy of humans and races and nationalities and from bad to good, and the Irish are at the bottom. And not many people know that, and they're not aware of it. And I think what is shocking and very exciting about going on this journey into the books is to discover, oh my goodness, the mindset of these people whose names we know, such as Charles Darwin. Their mindset was actually quite horrific when you read what they wrote, when you analyze their own ideas about how they thought society should be run, right? So in the case of Bertrand Russell, he thought science should be the leading factor in how a society is run. Scientific outlook and the impact of science on society. That we should get rid of morals, get rid of metaphysics, get rid of God, and we should be logical and rational and remove emotion from the equation and have everything run according to scientific principles of what science says is best. And if we can have a robot or a computer making those decisions for us, even better, because they will never make decisions, because us yucky humans with our unpredictable and unwieldy emotions will always get in the way and cock things up. So it's just been quite a whirlwind of a worldview reorientation for me to get into these books and to see what's written in there and to find out these amazing ideas. And the next 1,000,000 years has not been a disappointment. We have been, I think we've done 5 sessions now, and this is part 6. No, we've done 4 sessions, and this is part 6. We've done 4 sessions, and this is part 5, right? Yeah, that's it. We're on part 5. I should know that. But hopefully, if it all goes well and good tonight, and everything is nice and smooth, we will wrap it up, I think. Because it's quite a short book. It's not heavy with references and footnotes. He said at the beginning that these are just his ideas based on his life of being a scientist and his conversations with other people in his circles whom he did not feel comfortable naming. So that kind of tells you a little bit there. And so far, he's been making predictions about what's going to happen over the next 1,000,000 years with regards to the human population, how we're going to overcome problems such as food and population growth, and whether there will be an emergence of an elite class who will shepherd and farm the rest of us and dictate to us how to breed and who gets to mate with whom, make these sort of high-level decisions because they are the best and the brightest and the most scientifically worthy to make those decisions. That was one scenario that he was thinking about, and another scenario he was thinking about was whether we would organize ourselves eventually into a society along the lines of the ants or the bees, where we have one king or one queen and the rest of us are drones and workers, and we can be sacrificed for the greater good, the protection of the king or the protection of the queen. So he's been very it's kind of a thought experiment, this book. It's kind of him playing with averages, right? One of the things that he talks about is statistics now lets us project into the future the kind of things that might happen and think about those, because when you really look at it, when you have such a huge seething mass of humanity, the only thing that really matters is the average. Everything that deviates from the average, everything that goes below it or above it, really is just what he calls fluctuations, and they are to be disregarded and ignored. In other words, the individuals among us, the people who stand out or the people who stand in, I guess, the opposite of standing out. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like if you go under the average, that's one thing. If you're above average, that's another thing. He's kind of saying that that's not where the action is. The action is, let's look at the average and sort of extrapolate out from that where the average is going to take us over the next 1,000,000 years. I'm just going to clear my throat. And that's very curious to a society of people who might value the individual and recognize that each one of us has our own unique mix of faults and quirks and foibles, but along with those also come things we're good at, our advantages, our skills, our strengths, our passions, our noble qualities. And he seems to want to scrub all that variation, get rid of the individual, and make everybody nice and uniform and matching and constant across the board, and focus on that and manipulating the average, right? And messing with it and making it suitable to the people who are running things. From their point of view, as he said in the book, the sheep, the people who always follow orders, who never question authority, who do whatever their leaders say, he calls them the sheep. And he says, great, sheep, fantastic, predictable, easy to control, easy to manage, never kick back, never do anything unexpected. On the opposite side of that, you have the goats. He calls the goats. The goats are, they're usually not very nice people. And they're above average intelligence, and they're always asking pesky questions and challenging authority and trying to get explanations about why they should do a certain thing or believe a certain thing. And they're too unpredictable and hard to control and hard to manage, and they're always causing problems. And, we want to get rid of those goats, those people who think independently and outside the box, who question authority figures. Get rid of those and keep the sheep. Protect the sheep and look after the sheep and make sure they never realize that is what they are. But you tell them they're very good people and they're very obedient and loyal, and you pat them on the head and you give them a little biscuit. Maybe you let them watch a bit of TV. Maybe you let them have a couple of days off every week from work. Maybe even you let them go on holiday once a year, maybe twice a year even. And you pat them on the head and you tell them, good, well played. So the kind of ideas that he's playing with and that he's looking at are very much the sort of things that the managerial elite would be thinking about and playing with, right? Another one of the things that he's predicted as well is injections. He says maybe we'll get hormonal injections that alter the intellectual and moral qualities of individuals. So he's looking at what is science going to provide to us in the future. Another aspect of the book has been that he's telling us that oil and coal are going to run out, and there's going to be an energy crisis. And that is going to have to be dealt with. So we're going to have food crisis, energy crisis, overpopulation crisis. How is that going to be dealt with? And what might that look like in a million years' time? The other thing that he keeps mentioning and underscoring and reminding us is that humans are an animal. And not only are we an animal, we're a wild animal. And he says we cannot be domesticated. And that whole chapter, actually, I need to go back and review and listen to again, because I couldn't quite get to the nugget of his argument. But whether we are domesticated or wild, we're animals in his view. We are no better, no worse than a slug or a sloth or a monkey, maybe a fish or some sort of wriggly insect, an elephant. Animals are all just part of nature, and nature is brutish and nasty and based on violence and survival of the fittest, and you have to kill or be killed. It is a dog-eat-dog world out there, my friend. And so if you somehow rise to some position of authority or influence or wealth, then you are obviously part of the fittest among us here in the human race, and therefore you deserve to be dictating to everyone else what we have to do and how we have to live and what we can and can't do. And this book was written in 1953, and doesn't it align very snugly with what we read about in Fabian Freeway, which was the previous book we read through on this channel. That took us 14 videos to get through. So it was a much longer, denser, more backed up, well-referenced book, scholarly, let's say, or academic. But it aligns very nicely with this book, because in this book we're getting that view of human beings as a sort of domestic, a herd of animals that need to be domesticated and farmed. I can't think of a better word than farmed, really. Farmed for our taxes, farmed for our attention, farmed for our energy, farmed for our, you name it, everything, really. And it fits snugly because what Fabian Freeway described was this slow, gradualist creep of socialism designed and set into motion by a small group of people who met in 1884, and through their penetration and permeation of labor unions, of political parties, of universities, of newspapers, publishing houses, getting in there, spreading their ideas, getting their people into positions of influence who could change those organizations from within. you've seen, or at least, you know, if you're very old, you've seen it. If you're younger, then you can read about it, and you're now living in that control system that has been gradually getting stronger, you know, a brick put in it each year until eventually you're going to find yourself just walled in on every single side. And you're going to be like scratching your head like, oh, I didn't see them building this wall, because they're only putting one brick in it every, you know, few months or so. It's a slow, gradualist sort of plan, but it's getting faster. And we're seeing the change accelerate now, especially since 2020. It's rapid now. These changes are coming out thick and fast. We're being bombarded with events and news that should be historic on their own. And there's like a new unprecedented historic event every week, it feels like. So it's accelerating, and it's the mind view of people. It's the mindset of people like Charles Galton Darwin, and it's the efforts of people such as the Fabian socialists, as described in the Fabian Freeway, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, George Bernard Shaw, and their ilk. Kind of the mindset united with that intention to build a society that is controlled top down by rules and regulations and permits and laws and licenses and all this complicated, unnecessary, Kafkaesque bureaucracy that gets in the way of people, good, hardworking, honest, decent, moral people with integrity, just living their life, not wanting to cause harm to anyone. And I've heard it said before that, you know, history is like that competition or battle or conflict between the people who want to be left on their own and the people who won't leave them on their own. You know, I had a story from a colleague who was telling me about how she has 2 young children, and for her and her husband to take her 2 young children on holiday outside of school term time, she will be fined £160 per person per child. So £640 on top of whatever it costs to book the holiday, on top of whatever it costs to spend, whatever you got to buy, clothes, food, entertainment, all that other stuff while you're on the holiday for 2 adults and 2 children. Then the government steps in and says, oh, by the way, we're going to hammer you for another £640 on top of that, right? And this is just insane to me. I was shocked. I was flabbergasted. My jaw was on the floor when she told me this. I couldn't believe that is the state of the society we live in now. So it's either pay a fine, or you've got to go on holiday when everybody else goes on holiday, when all the prices are hiked up because it's peak time. You know, everywhere's busy. You can't get a nice, peaceful, relaxing holiday because the whole place is crawling with other children and families, right? So she, in her words, she said, we're punished for having children. And I thought, that is just very alarming and sickening and disgusting and disgraceful. And it shouldn't be allowed to happen. Why it's allowed to happen, why it is happening, probably something we'll have to talk about and analyze on another video. But from my point of view, getting into these books, reading about these aspects of history that are neglected, that are occulted, that are not given to us, you know, they're in dusty books. They're in dusty books that are sort of hidden. And you've got to go actively out to seek them and read the books, or listen to people who read the books. That's the other thing as well. If you don't have the time and the energy to read them yourselves, you can listen to other people read them. And so I'm trying to fill that void. That's what I'm trying to do here. Because the control system is getting up and running. It's being built. It's being advanced quickly, rapidly. It's insane. The changes, my parents' generation to my generation, the changes that have been made are really just madness, right? So we're in a sticky situation, but a lot of people, they're distracted by things like, drawings. A lot of people, they really like to put X's in boxes. You know, just get a piece of paper and a pen, put a little X in a box, pat yourself on the back and feel good about it, and tell yourself that you're making a difference and you're invested in the world and you're doing the right thing and you're a good, moral, upstanding human being. That's the minimum effort. I mean, an X in a box, and watch loads of TV, argue with your mates down a pub and put an X in a box. What's that going to change? So there's other things we need to do. We need to get a better awareness and understanding of the system and how it actually works, a better awareness and understanding of the mindset of the people who inhabit all these roles in the system, and understand the point of view they're approaching things from, because they're not coming at it from the point of view of a mother with 2 kids who is struggling to make ends meet and is now getting fined for trying to take her children on holiday off peak, right? These kids are under 10. What are they going to, so what is so valuable for a week or 2 weeks in school that they're going to get in school that is going to benefit them more than going to another place, seeing another culture, having an experience, making memories, learning things, being hands-on physically in a new place to see the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, all that stuff. Infinitely more valuable than whatever they've got lined up for them in school. A bit of colouring in, probably a sex education lesson, and probably some other form of, globalist indoctrination and programming that will prepare them to be a global citizen of the future, living in the system that we're sort of analysing and talking about and learning about on this channel. Okay, so that is my little ramble, my intro. I don't really have much else prepared. I just thought I would ramble for a little bit, give people a bit of chance to turn up. And what I might do, if you bear with me for a moment, is just go and close the window, because I realize I've left it open and I'm getting a lot of side noise from the traffic. So if you just bear with me 2 minutes, I'll put you back onto the waiting screen, play a bit of tunes for you, and I'll just go and close that window. Excuse me. All right, I'm back. The window is closed and we can get on with our book reading. So I'll just give a shout out to people in the chat. What have we got? Who have we got? Sorry, what have we got? I apologize. Who have we got? We got Frank and Gwen. Good evening to you both. Hope you've got your snacks and supplies, because this could be a longer one tonight than usual. We've got SD and Adam and Ashley Styles and Bitcoin mining as well. Very happy to have you all here. Hello, good evening to you all. Salutations. And a few comments as well about, the situation with children and schooling. It's disgusting. It really is disgusting. I wouldn't mind so much if you knew they were getting a quality education. They were getting the trivium, the quadrivium, logical thinking skills, but they're not. They're being taught to prioritize emotions above all else, to go with, to believe. To believe whatever they think and feel as fact, that they are the arbiters of truth and they get to decide what is true in the world. And it's all moral relativism, and it is all setting them up for absolute failure in the future. Because this system of ours, this schooling system of ours, is really not helping people to be hardworking, to start businesses, to be of use and utility to the people around you, to build strong networks, whether they are professional, whether they are social, to be monogamous and pair up and have children and raise good, healthy, moral children and teach them and know how to teach them to be good members of society, because that's what a civilization and a society should all be about, right? It should all be about get together, have some children, and pass on and teach what is good to those children. If you disagree with what I've just said, then you're an incredibly cynical person, and maybe you are infected with a touch of the old solipsism, moral relativism. You might argue that, well, no, just having fun and doing what I want to do and going to parties and, playing computer games and doing whatever makes me feel good in the moment. That's the most important thing, just the maximization of feeling good. That's what's important. And I would say, no, that's not what's important. It's a road to hell. If all you're interested in is your own feeling and your own well-being and what makes you comfortable and happy in the moment, then you're never going to be comfortable and happy. Okay, it doesn't work like that. You have to strive for bigger things, more important things, and you want to try and achieve things in life. And you want to try and find people who you can have trusting, loyal, loving relationships with, relationships that are built on kindness and compassion and empathy and encouragement, sincere encouragement. People who see your potential and they want to see you do better and succeed and improve on who you are. Because it's all well and good, just be yourself and just accept people as they are. There's a little nugget of wisdom there. But the people who really love you, and when you really love yourself, you don't just accept someone exactly the way you accept them the way they are, but you also tell them you could be so much more. You could be so much more than you are. If you just put 5% more effort in to improve in. And we all know there's ways we could improve, right? So a society, a family based on these kind of higher ideals of what the human man and woman is capable of, that would be something worth not going on holiday for if your children were being taught that kind of thing, right? Are they getting taught that kind of thing? I doubt it. I don't know. It's been a while since I was in school, so I'm not sure. But I sincerely doubt it. One thing's for sure, they're not getting the same education that people like Charles Galton Darwin got when he went to, what was the name of that school he went to? Can't remember now. But he went to the same school as Ghislaine Maxwell went to, which was the same school that a bunch of the royal family went to. The name of it is here. I'm going to try and pull it up quickly. I can just see his higher education, his further education. Let's have a look at early life. I can't find it right now. Marlborough College, that's the one. We should be able to remember that because it's the name of a cigarette, isn't it? Marlborough College, and they get a completely different education to the one that the likes of the peons, the plebs get. And our children, when we send our children to a state-run school, for example, it's like garbage for the lower levels of society and a high-level ability to think and rationalize and analyze and argue and debate wide-ranging topics, multiple languages, history that's more accurate, and we get a sort of chewing gum version of that it keeps your mouth busy while you're chewing, but it doesn't give you any nutrition or any sustenance. It might stave off your feelings of hunger for a little while, but it doesn't fill you up. It doesn't nourish you. It doesn't help power and energize your body or your brain. It's just a simulation of something that's useful. So thank you, Gwen. Yeah, you jumped in there. Marlborough College. Appreciate that. So what's going on in the chat? Streaky Bacon. Streaky Bacon. Welcome, sir. Very good to have you here. Ashley Styles says, I walked past a young couple earlier. The girl said to the lad, just Google it. That was enough for me. We're damned. I shouldn't laugh, but it is sad. But it's also funny. And if it's, laugh or cry, it's kind of that's the options that we got here, isn't it? So that is what we got. Streaky Bacon says, our pre-Roman history has been subverted for political cause. That I would not be surprised at all. Because as I was saying, getting some of these older books, I had a new one arrive today. When you get some of these older books, it's quite surprising what's in them. And these aren't even like super, super old books, but I got this one today. And you can see that it's kind of faded. Maybe we just have a quick impromptu look on the old book cam. So this book is about it's a military book. And is a memoir about a gentleman who is called From the Danube to the Yalu by Mark Clark, this man here. And just about his time in the army. I think it was 1954, yeah. So actually a year before the one we're reading tonight. So you've got negotiating with the Russians, 2 years of Cold War. He was over in Korea. He was building up the Republic of Korean Army, manpower shortage. The thing I got this for was his insight of being of dealing with the United Nations, right? Because this links into the book we're going to be reading after Next Million Years, which I'm going to talk about now. So let's go over to this cam. So welcome to the show. I think that's enough rambling. We got to get into the book. Just a quick reminder for everybody, I've got the YouTube channel, and on here is where you can see all of my previous books. I shouldn't say my, it's really our, because each one of these we read together as a group, and there's a lot of good chat and banter and back and forth in the chat replays and on camera there. These are all the books we've done so far. This is the one we're doing now. And these have all been very instructive, very interesting, and key pieces of the puzzle. And I would encourage anybody who is into long-form content and has maybe time to plug some headphones in while they're working or walking or traveling. It's a very good time to chew through some of these. Some of them are quite short, 4 videos for the Open Conspiracy, 5 videos for the Bertrand Russell book. Some of them are meatier and longer, such as the Rockefeller book and Fabian Freeway. So you've got some options there. And that is the YouTube channel. I haven't uploaded all of these onto Rumble and Odyssey yet, although we are gradually, slowly but surely building out those channels too. And as always, if you are so inclined, I would very much appreciate any sort of donation, pounds, pennies, dollars, cents, euros, anything you can send my way would be greatly appreciated. I love doing this work. It is very invigorating and exciting and fun for me. And if you get value from it, there are many ways to exchange value. And they're all here on this page. Lower down, you can see the links to the YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey channels. We've also got a Telegram group, an Instagram page, and a Twitter page. So you can stay up to date on any of those platforms. And then there's crypto addresses at the bottom if you want to send some crypto. That is also welcome. That is allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. And I wanted to mention this. So this is the last poll that we had on the Telegram chat. So the Telegram chat, when we finish a book, I put up a new poll, and the members of the Telegram chat are invited to vote on what book they want to see next on the channel. This was the last vote, and it was between The Next Million Years, The Fearful Master by G. Edward Griffin, and The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. And this was the result. We had 40 votes on this one, and 2 little fire emojis, which was very nice. This is the most interaction we've had on these polls, so it's growing and getting bigger, and it came in pretty close. This is the closest one we've had so far. Next Million Years came out on top. But what I decided to do with this one, because it was so close, and because I really want to read all these books and they all sort of tie in together, I decided what we would do is we'll just do all 3 of these books in the order that they came in on the poll, and which is also happens to be the chronological order as well, you might have noticed. So that's nice. It worked out pretty well. So we're wrapping up Next Million Years tonight, and then we're going to move on to The Fearful Master by Edward Griffin. And these are the 3 books. This is Fearful Master. This is from the 60s. Small little paperback. I found an unread, untouched copy, brand new copy, and it came with a whole bunch of extras, pamphlets and leaflets that had been in their wrapping and their shrink wrapping since the 60s when they were published and when G. Edward Griffin was selling them. If you see on here, there is actually that's the price. It was $1 back then. And I paid much more for it than that when I saw it, because I thought that is a slice of history that I want to have. But this is an untouched, unread paperback, and that's going to be the next thing we look at after we finish the Charles Galton Darwin book. And then after that's done, we're going to go into The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy by Eowyn Ratthew, and we're going to have a nice view of this is the 1950s, and this is going to bring us right up to 2012. This was written. And this book covers Lord Milner, his relationship with Cecil Rhodes, their relationship with Rothschild, the establishment, the Balfour Declaration agreement, the establishment of the country that led to the establishment of, and also their interaction and I think their cooperation with the Fabian socialists at the Fabian Society and their efforts to construct this system of control that we're living under now, of which the United Nations is a very key piece of the puzzle, right? So I think these 3 all tie together really nicely. I'm very excited to continue with them, and we're going to be doing that after we finish Charles Galton Darwin. Tonight we should get Charles Galton Darwin all wrapped up. And I think that is it for our little introductory spiel. So, yeah, that's all we got. Lovely. I'm going to move this down here. And then let's get into the book. Nice. We've got a bit of lively chat on the channel. I'm glad you guys are talking to each other and helping each other learn. And I see good things recommended, such as Archaics, such as Gura. Gura is a really interesting guy. I'm enjoying his stuff a lot at the moment. Giureh. And his interview with Melissa was very good. I like that a lot. So yeah, good resources in the chat. But tonight, for our main event, we'll be finishing, hopefully, Charles Galton Darwin in the next million years. It depends how much I am flabbergasted and have to stop to interject. I've just got a bit of an itchy nose, so I'm going to take care of that, have a sip, and then dive into the book. Excuse me. All right, everybody comfortable? Everybody ready to go? So, we got, firstly, we're going on with chapter 9. This is the pursuit of happiness. The present chapter is perhaps a digression from the main theme of this essay, but its subject is such a chief aim of mankind that it seemed to merit discussion. Happiness has been the subject of a great deal of magnificent literature, but it has also been the subject of more trite aphorisms and of more bad philosophy than almost any other in the world. In venturing to discuss it, I am acutely conscious that I shall probably be joining the ranks of the bad philosophers, but it has seemed to me that since happiness is of such principal importance to man, I could hardly be justified in evading the subject. My main theme is to be the pursuit of happiness, and this is different from happiness itself. A great part of human conduct is dictated by the motive, I am going to do so and so because I think it will make me happier, though the prescription is all too often faulty. However, the result is some course of action, and this will affect the external world so that it becomes relevant to history. It is this that justifies its consideration here. Before coming to this side of the question, however, it will be well to begin by considering happiness itself. Much happiness comes quite unsought, and in examining their memories for the chief happy or unhappy incidents of their life, most people will find that the really important ones were concerned with entirely intimate matters of a personal kind which had little relation to the conditions of the external world. Such occasions of happiness or unhappiness will presumably always be among the most important things in life, and since they are independent of the outer world, they will continue much the same in the future as in the past. There is undoubtedly a great difference among individuals, in that some are naturally cheerful and others naturally melancholy, and as these are inherent characteristics, there is nothing to be done about them. But it is relevant to the present inquiry to ask which type has the greater survival value. To put the matter in its crudest form, is a naturally cheerful person likely to have a larger family than a melancholy one? For if so, then there would be a prospect of a slow increase of cheerfulness throughout the human race. I cannot answer this question at all, but I can see no reason to believe that cheerfulness should triumph rather than melancholy. I feel like he's writing this like he doesn't know what happiness is. Like he hasn't experienced it and he's just writing about it from a sort of theoretical point of view. Like, oh, I've heard people talk about happiness before, yes. Like he knows the concept, but he doesn't actually, he can't speak to it from his own experience. I don't know. I'm kind of getting that sense. I could be wrong. There is also the very greatest difference among individuals in the pitch of their emotions, in that some are alternately intensely happy or miserable, while others take both emotions much more placidly. Here again, the question arises whether there is survival value in intense emotions, and again it is not easy to answer, though it may be noted that such emotions tend to go with an instability of character which may often lead to forming bad judgments in the other activities of life, and these bad judgments can hardly help in survival. Among the inherent tendencies of people towards happiness or unhappiness, there is one characteristic, and a very sinister one, which cannot be overlooked. In any boys' school where discipline gets it all slack, it is practically universal for there to be bullying. This means that there are many of mankind who positively enjoy making their fellows miserable. It is by no means a majority, but it is certainly not a negligible minority. It is no use arguing that this is only a boyish failing, and that in later life the bully will become a virtuous citizen. Conditions in this country give little scope for the exercise of brutality by adults. But this has not always been so, and it is not so in many parts of the world even now. It is the strong arm of the law, and not a change in his nature, that has restrained the bully. It is not easy to see anything that will tend to eliminate him, because his selfishness is a positive help to his survival in all conditions but those of the highest and most stable civilization. So this is a good insight into the mindset. Selfishness is an is an advantage, and it's going to help you survive. And every action is to be judged on whether or not it helps you survive. Okay, not whether or not it helps other people survive, or whether it helps your family or your children or your loved ones or members of your tribe survive. No. It's about are you surviving? And therefore that's how we measure it. So selfishness is a good thing because it helps you survive. Except in stable civilization, and even these conditions only check the expression of his propensities without destroying them. In thinking of the future happiness of mankind, it is a sobering thought that there will be quite a perceptible fraction of humanity that definitely gets satisfaction, and so presumably happiness, from making its fellows unhappy. And maybe he's speaking from experience, maybe he knows that maybe he is among this perceptible fraction of humanity. He might be part of that class of people. Or he might have witnessed it a lot throughout his life. Remember, he is his godfather was Francis Galton, famous eugenicist, or eugenist, as he says in this book. His grandfather was Charles Darwin, who I mentioned at the start of the stream. Hates the Irish, so remember that, Frank. Don't worry, be happy, indeed. Among the more external conditions of human life, a great deal of misery is directly due to physical pain, and if these sufferings can be removed, either by cure or by means of harmless opiates, it will clearly increase the sum of human happiness. Okay, so let's drug people. That's starting to sound like Aldous Huxley, isn't it? Hang on, I think I've got a sneeze coming. Excuse me. Bitcoin Mining says, in prep schools, kids bullying is not allowed by real head boys. Yeah, you have to earn the right to bully, right? I don't know. I didn't go to a prep school. I don't know what it's like. Excuse me a minute. Okay. So to deal with the physical pain, instead of teaching people how to be healthy and have strong bodies that are free of pain, and how to look after their bodies through proper nutrition and exercise and movement and exposure to nature and sleep, no, we don't need to teach people like that. Give them opiates. Harmless opiates, though. What an oxymoron that is. Harmless opiates. Medical science has already accomplished much in this direction, and it holds promise of a great deal more, so that, in this obvious sense, man may confidently expect to be happier in the future. But there is another side of physical suffering that is not so easy to judge about, and that is hunger. And I'll just remind you, anybody who hasn't seen the earlier videos, he does advocate at one point that what we need is a scientific solution that will render wood and grass edible by humans, and that would be a good thing, to have everyone eating wood and grass. If population pressure is to be a main feature of human history, there will usually be a marginal fraction of humanity living on the verge of starvation, which cannot be reckoned as a happy state. However, it is hard to be sure even about this, for the starvation is not usually continuous, but comes in periodically referring famines, and there is room for happiness in the intervals. To those of us who have never experienced real hunger, this may seem unlikely, but it is reported by those who know the Eskimos well that they are the most cheerful people on Earth, and this, though they are certainly the race living most continually on the verge of starvation. I'm just going to blow my nose. Isn't it the case that Eskimos eat a very, very meat and animal fat heavy diet? Just saying. Insofar as happiness is regarded as an object of pursuit, there is the implication that it is at least partly within the control of the pursuer. Such happiness is a less deep emotion than those I have been considering, and its antithesis can hardly be described as melancholy or misery, but rather as discontent. Much discontent arises from noble motives, but it has regretfully to be admitted that the motive lying behind the widest range of discontent is mere envy, that most unamiable of human characteristics. But, whatever the motive, it certainly produces great unhappiness, and it is the kind that stimulates the sufferer into seeking a cure. Man is a very poor prescriber for his own troubles, and he usually sees his grievance, whether real or imaginary, as the only thing in the world that stands between him and a permanent state of perfect bliss. Of course, as soon as he has succeeded in removing the grievance, he at once finds another, and this again becomes the most important thing in the world, with eternal happiness once again just around the corner. The target of the pursuit will always evade the pursuer. It is not recognized by most people that happiness does not come from a state, but from a change of state. That it is so illustrated by the total failure of every writer to describe a satisfactory paradise, whether in heaven or on earth. The tedium of eternity has almost become a joke, and the descriptions of the earthly utopias are no better. Most of them fail to recognize that the human mind cannot hold any emotion for long at an even intensity, but that it always soon degenerates into something much more tepid. A few authors, of course, have recognized this. Thus, Samuel Butler describes the criticism of the Christian heaven by an Erewhonian. Don't know about that one. Maybe that's a character from a Samuel Butler novel, play, or book, poem, I don't know. Erewhonian, who points out how much better it would be if one always thought that one's wishes were going to be thwarted, and then at the last moment they were fulfilled. Then there is the almost certainly mythical American preacher who told his congregation that heaven would not consist in the playing of harps, but would, like earth, be a center of busy activity. We can be fairly sure that no bears would have been allowed on the celestial stock exchange, but the preacher did recognize that it is a change of state, and not a state, that makes for happiness. But it is not simply a change of state that makes for happiness. There must be something unexpected about it. Butler's Erewhonian would very soon have got bored by knowing that he was certain not to be really disappointed. Again, in some professions, there is an automatic annual increase of salary, but this change is apt to be mentally discounted long in advance. Contrast it with the real joy at receiving an unexpected promotion. A great proportion of mankind enjoy gambling. If their conditions are bad, this is easily understandable, because the remote chance of betterment is worth taking. But very many people in secure and prosperous conditions also find it almost necessary to gamble, and this is because it provides just the element of uncertainty, otherwise missing in their lives, that is essential for their happiness. The external conditions, then, that are most likely to produce happiness are benefits received at uncertain intervals, and to make the individual continuously conscious of his happiness, there must obviously be several such benefits during the course of his life. So just a side note, he's actually, as far as I know, he's right here. And this is the idea behind social media and the infinity scroll right? The infinity scroll, I don't know if you remember, but when there was a time where you could, if you were on Facebook and you caught up with everything, it would say, boom, you've caught up with everything. That they took that away. So now all these apps, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you just scroll, and you just scroll forever and ever and ever and ever, and it just never ends. It will never go away. You will never be, you'll never get to the bottom of it. And that is because behind that infinite scroll is this algorithm, this mechanism, this program, which is designed to give you a reward at uncertain intervals. And it's the uncertain intervals which make scrolling endlessly for a very long time so addictive, right? So I think he's bang on, actually, with that. In the present economic conditions, the prescription for a great many people would all too often be 10% more pay for 10% less work, with the dose necessarily repeated and not infrequent intervals. This is to put the matter very crudely, but it does subscribe to the general human view on the antithesis between work and pleasure. The prescription is, of course, fantastically impossible of achievement over the course of the ages. Even in a single lifetime, the cumulative effect of compound interest would defeat it. And though the son could not expect to start where his father left off, yet he would expect to start above where his father had started, so that the law of compound interest, it is true that it would be at a lower rate, would again come in for the succeeding generations. There is no chance of this sort of thing continuing over 1,000 years, let alone 1,000,000 years, unless there are intervening periods of disaster to give occasion for a new start. The really wonderful thing about the last century has been that exciting improvements of condition have been happening at frequent intervals for about 6 generations, and even so, it is not very evident that those living in the present conditions of enhanced prosperity are any happier than the people described by Dickens. A chief question, from the point of view of this essay, is whether there is any survival value in happiness. had to come up, didn't it? Are the naturally happy people more likely to be the ancestors of future generations than are the rest? For if they are, then a great number of the future race will tend to inherit this happy disposition. The answer is very doubtful, and it may well be negative. The reason lies in the fact that contentment is not a stimulus to action like discontent. It must, of course, be recognized that there is a good deal of what I may call stimulated discontent. Oh, interesting. Stimulated discontent. That's a phrase I think worth sticking in your back pocket. For many political leaders find it useful to stir up discontent among their adherents, even though these may really be of the contented type. So again, giving us an insight into the games and the machinations and the worldview and the real purpose of the so-called leaders among us, quote-unquote leaders, and what an appropriate quote to be finding on a day such as today when everybody is out voting, X marks the spot, stick it in the box, change the world for the better. Someone else will solve all your problems, they'll fix it. Jim will fix it. And not realizing that it's a deliberate show. What you see, what is on the radio, these sound bites, these interviews, it's all scripted and it's all a performance to get you riled up and get you feeling more discontent. Leaving aside this stimulated discontent, a man who has the spur of his own genuine discontent to drive him will struggle harder to achieve success than will the contented type. Again, I think he's actually right on the money here. I can speak from my own experience. I've tried a bunch of different things in my life, and once I tried to get into a certain side hustle type thing, and I was learning about it, and the guy I was learning from, he just said, "You know what? I think you're just too comfortable to learn this." because I wasn't so driven, I wasn't so ambitious, I wasn't just like I will do whatever it takes to make this thing happen. I was like, actually, I'm pretty comfortable and I quite like my life. And I'm very satisfied and happy with simple things. And he pointed that out to me and I had to sort of like, yeah, you're probably right. Actually, I'm a little bit too comfortable. But I don't know. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, although I do think it can be quite a bit of a superpower to know how to be happy with less, particularly when the plan is to own nothing, right? To own nothing and be happy, you might as well learn how to be happy with less. On the average, he will be more successful, but the success will not content him, so that he will always be spurred on to further efforts. If this success is, as in the long run it will be, associated with his making a greater contribution to later generations, it follows that the discontented type will increase in numbers at the expense of the contented type. This argument leads to the disappointing conclusion that future man will be more discontented than man of the present day. I do not want to press it strongly, but in the light of it, no matter what the future conditions of life may be, there seems absolutely no reason to expect any notable increase in the sum of human happiness. So this to me sounds like, he's telling his friends, he's mixing in these sort of social engineers, the scientific elite who want to run society according to an algorithm. And he's saying to them, look, we don't even need to worry about the happiness of the peons because they'll work harder if they're unhappy. We can get more out of them if they're unhappy and discontent and dissatisfied with things. This is such a key thing and such great timing for this to pop up on the day that everyone's going and putting their little piece of paper and things need to change. Like the British Labour Party's slogan this year is just the word change. Not even good change, positive change, change for the better, change we can agree on, change you can count on, change you can look forward to. No, it's just change. Just change things. I mean, that is the laziest bit of copywriting and sloganeering I've ever heard in my life. But it is also very truthful and honest because if they get in, when, because they can't just keep the Tory party in forever, can they? They've been in forever already, so they're going to have to change it. They will change things. The Labour Party will change things for the better, for the benefit, more happiness, more affordable something, anything. Just make anything more affordable. No, we're just changing things. Things have to change. Things need to change around here. If somebody walks in and says, if your boss walks in, slams the door behind him and says, things need to change around here, or your parents walk in. You get home from school and your parents are sitting there and it's all silent and you think, oh, what's going on? Boom, things got to change around here. You're in trouble, right? When someone says that to you, you think, oh my God, what did I do? I fucked up. What was it? You go back and you're like, oh, what did I do? What did I do wrong? Okay, change. But just remember when you're commenting on politics, when you are watching the talking heads comment on it, because everyone's all over it now. Russell Brand's all over it. Everyone's all over it. The presidential debate in America, whatever. The purpose of all that is to make you discontent. So you will go out and work harder and pay more taxes and invest more time and effort and energy in the system and less time and energy in your relationships, in your health, in your community, in your family, in raising a family, starting a family, right? That is the purpose of it. That's what it exists to achieve. So bear that in mind and remind other people. People work harder when they're unhappy and discontent. Therefore, it's in the interest of politicians to keep people unhappy and discontent. Okay, rant over. So, what he said is, no advantage to people being happy. So we have no reason, as the ruling elite, the scientific ruling elite, we have no reason to increase happiness on any level or in any way whatsoever, right? And that's logic. That's logical analysis and statistical analysis. Continuing. In connection with the matter of human happiness, it is a very pertinent question to ask whether man really enjoys being civilized. For on the answer, to some extent, depends the stability of future civilization. In the past, There have been so many cases of the decay of civilizations that it is rather tempting to believe that the majority really find a state of barbarism more congenial. Apparently, right. Okay, let's hear them out. Hear them out. Thus, the civilization of the Mayas had already seriously decayed under the rule of the Aztecs long before it was destroyed by the Spaniards. Again, the Roman Empire was destroyed by the onslaught of the Germans, in spite of the fact that it had been steadily and on the whole successfully civilizing many of them for 2 or 3 centuries before the collapse. They found the barbaric life more satisfying. To take a modern example, the Republic of Liberia was repeopled by Negroes returned to it from America. These had seen civilization, even if they may not themselves have gained much profit from it, but anyhow, they showed little wish to avoid the relapse. There are, no doubt, many causes that have led to such relapses into barbarism, but a chief one is the existence of the class of men I have called bullies. Such men are apt to be brave and self-confident, but selfish and concerned only with their personal interests, and above all, indifferent to the sufferings of those around them. Such men, always ready to assume leadership, only interested in their own advantage, and indifferent to the fate of their fellows, are perfectly adapted instruments for destroying the delicate balance of civilization. So, he said earlier that the bullies are actually, didn't he say the bullies are a minority? The small class, small group of people. And now he's saying that most of humanity would rather live in a state of brutality, barbarism. So, I don't know, it doesn't quite track, but I get the point. I see where he's coming from. Now, though, it is indisputable that many civilizations have relapsed into barbarism. Each of them must, after all, have grown out of barbarism before it could relapse. So that instead of arguing that man has relapsed into barbarism on account of his dislike of civilization, one might argue with almost equal force that he has become civilized because he does not like barbarism. The best answer to the question which of the two he prefers can be given by examining the parallel of another human taste. Originally, man was a hunter, and very many people still retain the trace of it, in that they find a spontaneous, almost instinctive joy in the chase, which they can get in no other way. About 10,000 years ago, there came the agricultural revolution. This was a totally new thing for man, and indeed for the whole animal kingdom, except for the independent discovery of it by a few insects. At first, it can have had no emotional appeal at all, but rather the reverse. The discoverers must have felt they were doing a disagreeable and tedious job, and they only did it because it was so clearly advantageous. For a long time, the great majority would retain the emotions of the hunter and would only cultivate the soil under the impulsion of stark necessity. And remember that, you vegetarians and vegans. Farming came out of necessity, not out of preference. Farming plants, I mean. The practice of agriculture was an acquired character, and so it had to be acquired anew in each generation, and many must have revolted against the tedium and gone back to the more congenial practice of hunting. But there would be some whose nature was more tolerant of farming who would stay farmers, and those of their sons who inherited the taste would continue on the farm, while their brothers would drift back to hunting, so that there would be an unconscious selection towards agriculture. The new habit of life would gradually establish itself in some men's heredity, carrying with it an emotional appeal which might ultimately become as strong as had always been the appeal of hunting to the rest of the race. I do not know if biological principles could tell how long the creation of such an instinct would take, but there is no need to ask the question, because we have the answer before us. There are a great many people now existing, that is, certainly after less than 10,000 years, who undoubtedly have the instinct for agriculture. These are the people who derive deep emotional satisfaction from gardening, even when they are in no way driven to it by economic necessity. Though Voltaire might be claimed as a typical product of the age of civilization, he really belongs to the age of agriculture, for he represents Candide in his disgust at the world round him, as finding his ultimate satisfaction in the cultivation of his garden. The same sort of thing must be happening with the urban revolution. In China and the Levant, this goes back for several thousand years, and already the promotion of the taste for civilization from an acquired to an inherent human character must have begun. But for most of the world, this can hardly be so yet. After all, in Western Europe and America, it is hardly more than 30 generations since most of the ancestors of the present city dwellers were completely barbarous, and it is therefore not surprising that many of their descendants should regard civilization as a disagreeable necessity without emotional appeal. This explains why so many civilizations have been rather short-lived, but it also answers the question whether man really likes being civilized. There can be no doubt whatever of the advantage of being civilized in that it permits of larger populations, and these will prevail by their numbers against the smaller populations of barbarism. Some of the citizens may not like being civilized at the present time, but that does not matter, for in due course their descendants will grow to like it emotionally and instinctively by the same process of unconscious selection from among them as has happened with agriculture. The process has begun already, and in the course of a few thousand years at most, a great fraction of mankind will feel spontaneously the emotional appeal of civilization. Let me follow this train of thought to its conclusion. If the agricultural revolution has followed hunting into our instincts, and if the urban revolution is going the same way, what about the scientific revolution, which has only just begun? The majority of mankind certainly have no taste for science. They regard the subject as a disagreeable necessity, only practiced for its obvious material advantages, and they relapse from it with enthusiasm towards the more instinctive tastes of the earlier revolutions. Nevertheless, the advantages of the newly acquired character are evident, and there can be little doubt that it will follow the same course as the previous ones by the gradual selection of those who find the new system naturally congenial. In this way, I shall expect that before the end of 10,000 years, science will make an emotional appeal to the instincts of the majority of the human race, of the same intensity as the emotions they now derive from the arts of the city, from the garden, and from the chase. There you are. That was chapter 9. So very much talking about the domestication of humans, and he seems to think that living in cities is civilized, and living outside of cities is barbarous. So, like if you want to farm, if you want to keep animals, if you want to live in nature, have a bit of land, raise your family in that sort of condition, then that's like barbarous. And it is those who enjoy the appeal of science and are willing to go and live in cities, which at the start of the book, wasn't he saying that cities were turning people into animals? He was saying that the conditions in cities were awful, wasn't he? Oh, hang on. I'm getting mixed up with a different reading that I did last weekend. Not in this book. That was the other one. But that's what this guy's saying here. Charles Galton Darwin, he's talking about scientism, which is what I've talked about in part 1 of this series. I was talking about scientism and how the class of people that he's coming from, that he is related to, whose legacy he has inherited, is very much the people who push scientism as a religion on the rest of us, right? So I'll have a quick review of the comments and then we'll crack on. We've got a lot to get through tonight. Just a quick shout out to Sedi Sapiente over on Rumble. Thank you for popping in and saying hello. I appreciate that. Frank Lennon says, ask the Chinese about opium. 55 days at Peking, eh? The Opium Wars and all that. Yeah, I've got a book on the Opium Wars we should read one time. Jack Beecham. Arrogance is dripping from the pages of this book, says Frank. Yeah. And then a comment as well on the stimulated discontent. That was the key part of this chapter for me, this admission. Frank says, how could the sum of human happiness increase with the likes of the UN, WHO, WEF, etc. at large in the world? Well, now we know that the mindset of the people who run these kinds of organizations is happiness is a disadvantage from their point of view. You know, from their managerial elite point of view, when people are happy, they just sit back and enjoy themselves and chill out and relax. We need people to be unhappy and discontent and dissatisfied. We need that negative emotion to drive people to go to work and to work hard and to make sacrifices, and then we can tax them on all that. So I think that was a really key admission, an insight into the mindset of the managerial elite and the managerial classes who are setting up these kinds of groups, right? ESP has just popped into the chat on Odyssey, says that sounds good, the opium trade. Yeah, that would be a good one. I found it down in Portsmouth in an Oxfam. I grabbed it. Pretty cheap, £4, £6, something like that. Ashley says, Whitney, Oxfordshire, Barbarian Central? ? I don't know, can't comment, I've never been there. And then and Gwen was saying that not everyone is suited to living in cities, I think. Yeah, I was getting mixed up with Tragedy and Hope. Last Saturday, I was in the Cutting Through the Matrix Tragedy and Hope book club. We talked about international socialism, and in that part of the book, Carol Quigley was talking about how socialism arose out of the horrific resistance to, out of wanting to solve the horrific conditions that people were living in cities, because they all went there to find work and they ended up in crowded conditions and they were living in squalor, working 16-hour days, and it was very bad. And that was partly what gave rise to this socialist movement and socialism. And that's why my mind made the connection, because I'd just been reading that last Saturday. So apologies there, a bit of cross wires. I'll just grab the opium book quickly. I'll show you that one because this is a bit deeper history. But I think it would be a good one to look at too. Oh, £7 it cost me this. The Chinese Opium Wars. Jack Beeching. A little map. Hutchinson of London. And this was 1975. So not a super old book. But still, I think that'd be an interesting one to get into. Can't knock that, can you? £7 from a second-hand bookshop. Come on. Just treasure lying around everywhere. Amazing. All right. Let's get ready and crack on with another chapter. So this one is the history. So I'm not sure what he means by the history. I don't know if that's going to be the authorized history or the history that we, the elite, want you to believe. As we said earlier in the chat, history is, well, two ways to say it, right? A lie agreed upon. I think that was Napoleon, or else it's written by the victors. And, plebs, peons, like us, we're not the victors, I don't think. Unless you're white, in which case you are the victor, obviously, and you've just been doing horrible things to everyone else throughout history, and you should be punished. That goes without saying. All right. So, and this is, funnily, chapter 10. X marks the spot. Another funny bit of synchronicity with the big events that are going on today. Hope people out there appreciate that. I can't plan these things. They just happen. Reminds me of all that numerology that we found with regard to the St. Paul's Cathedral on the Wikipedia article that we looked at the beginning of last part 4 on Tuesday. But anyway, so chapter 10, history. So this chapter is divided into a lot of sub parts as well. We'll just quickly have a look. So we've got the history, and then here he's banging on about population again. Golden Ages, science, economics, politics, civilization. So I'm not sure what he's going to do in this chapter. I don't know if he's going to tell us what this looks like in the future over the next 100 years. I don't know. Let's dive into it and find out. Chapter 10, the history. A history of the future is different from a history of the past because it cannot, in any sense, be a narrative. It cannot say what will happen in anything like the same manner as past history says what did happen. All it can do is to say what things will be happening most of the time and in most places, but without being able to specify those times and those places. This it does through consideration of the laws of nature, chief among which is the law of human nature. In the preceding chapters, I have given what seem to me to be the main principles of this law, and if I have given them correctly or even roughly so, it will be seen that the general trend of history is inevitable. It becomes hardly more than a summary of my previous discussions. And good evening to you, Johnny Fogg, and Shamanarchist, that's it. And Christine, all just popped in at the same time. Have you all just got back from voting? I hope so. Right. So that reminds me, actually, he did say earlier in the book, didn't he, that when you take the average into account and you disregard the fluctuations, then it becomes inevitable and you can predict what's going to happen and you can just say that is the way it's going to be, and that's that. Brush your hands off and say, boom, done. And there's no accounting for free will. It's all predestined because we live in this sort of mechanistic universe, and once the first domino has been knocked over, it's just a chain reaction going on into the future that nobody can change or do anything about, because that's the view of the world that these scientific elites tend to have. You know, they believe in laws of nature, but they do not believe that anything created those laws, put them into place, or sustains them continuously, which to my mind is silly. But, you know, I'm not a scientist, so what do I know? The variety of happenings of a million years is obviously so prodigious that, at some place and at some time, almost anything that could be thought of will be found to have occurred. And so, a prophet can foretell what he likes with the fair certainty that an example of it could be cited before the end of the period. I should not be content with such a verification of my predictions. I want to foretell the things that will be happening most of the time and over most of the earth. So, humble in his ability to do this then. And I should count it as defeat if the historian of a million years hence should point out that my forecasts were verified, because they did once happen for a few decades on some remote island in the Pacific. Indeed, I might express my ambition better by putting it the other way around. At the end of a million years, some Gibbon, with all the vast archives of the world at his disposal, may undertake the stupendous task of writing the whole history of the human race. In this excessively unlikely event of his reading this work, I should be best content if he considered it as unworthy of mention, because it was a mere description of all the things that were entirely familiar and therefore uninteresting, the things that all his readers would take for granted. He would feel free to pass them over and spend his time in describing the more exceptional and remarkable things that had happened in the course of the ages. Before coming to the details, it may be well to remind the reader once again of the operation of the law of large numbers in connection with probabilities. In the events of the world, one cannot, of course, actually give numerical values to the odds as one can in a game of chance, but I can use the analogy to show what I mean. If I said that the odds were 2 to 1 on such and such a state of the world as compared to some rival state, I should not mean that it was twice as likely that the favoured state would be happening all the time. I should mean that in the course of the ages it would prevail for about 2/3 of the time, and the rival state for 1/3. That sentence boggled my mind a little bit. I'm not very good with statistics. Now, there can be no doubt that most things in the world fall under the category of large numbers. The mere fact that there are, even at the present time, 2,000 million individuals guarantees this, so that probabilities become certainties in the sense that very probable things will be happening most of the time, while less probable things will still happen, but only for a small part of the time. But there may be occurrences so rare that the law of large numbers cannot be applied to them at all. For example, the discovery of the New World in the 15th century was a unique thing, because there were no other new worlds to discover. Or again, there is the unlikely but possible chance that there should be a collision of the solar system with another star which would destroy all life on Earth. If any such rare event should occur, it would upset all predictions, and there is nothing more to be said about it. There are, no doubt, readers who will dislike many of the things I am forecasting, and who will try to evade them by the hope that one of these rare, unforeseeable chances will entirely alter things, and lead to a condition of the world more to their liking. It is possible, but it is much more likely that such things will be unfavourable than favourable. Whereas small changes produced by chance are as likely to be beneficial as detrimental, when it comes to large changes, the probability is that they will be unfavourable. I have already cited an example of this from the science of genetics, where, by means of X-rays, changes can be induced in the genes of the cells of animals. If the change is small, it may benefit the animal, but if it is large, it is almost invariably deleterious and often lethal. The balance of the natural forces in an animal is so delicate that any large change in one feature upsets it entirely. Only if there were compensating large changes in other features could the condition of the animal be improved, and there is practically no chance of these other changes happening to occur simultaneously. A similar principle must apply to the delicate balance of interactions which go to make up the life of the human race. Thus, anyone who hopes that some rare, large, unforeseeable occurrence may better the fate of humanity is almost certain to be disappointed, for it is enormously more likely to worsen it. The best hopes of benefiting humanity are to be based not on this, but on the working of small changes and the law of large numbers. So that sounds a little bit like gradualism, like Fabian socialism, doesn't it? By which there is at least some prospect, little by little, of improving the condition of the world. I'm just going to add a little note there. Fabian gradualism. Or you might call it the totalitarian tiptoe, which is another snappy, snazzy little phrase for it, TTT. Or maybe that should be 4T, shouldn't it? Totalitarian tiptoe. Anyway. In what follows, I shall divide up the principal activities of humanity under the headings of population, economics, and so on, and consider each briefly in turn. It may be well to repeat that the views I put forward on these subjects are not intended to be exclusive. It is to be expected that there will be many happenings that contradict them. I am only claiming that such happenings are likely to occur a good deal less frequently than the conditions described here. Population. The central feature of human history must always be the pressure of population. Man, the wild animal, will obey the law of life and will tend to multiply until he is limited by the means of subsistence. This is the normal condition of the world, and it carries the consequence that the final check on population is by starvation. There will be a fraction of humanity, a starving margin, who have got to die simply because not enough food can be grown to keep them alive. The death may be directly due to intermittent famines or to diseases caused by malnutrition, or it may be due to warfare. For when a country is dying of starvation and sees or thinks it sees a neighbouring country with plenty to eat, it would be beyond most human nature to accept certain passive death instead of possible active death. The central question for humanity is the problem of the starving margin. To those of us living the life of Europe at the present time, this is a shocking fact, implying a condition so unfamiliar that there are many who may not willingly believe it. This is because of the quite exceptional history of the 19th century, during which, in spite of enormous increases of population, many countries had no starving margin at all. The disbelief may be helped by the fact that the population of some countries has recently started to decrease. Such decreases have occasionally happened before too, but as I have argued earlier, they constitute an entirely unstable state of affairs, in that the nations which are decreasing in numbers will die out and will be replaced by the starving margins of the others. On the timescale I am considering, the action of starvation can be treated as if it were uniform and continuous, but it is fortunate that it would not appear so to the individual, for famines are not like that. Since man can never aspire to the real control of climate, there will always be fluctuations in the harvests he can produce. For some years, there may be a sequence of good harvests, and starvation will be forgotten by everyone. But after that, a few bad harvests will fatally redress the balance. So it would be wrong to imagine that the starving margin suffers a life of continuous grinding misery, but rather one of misery alternating with a precarious prosperity. Even so, there are many at the present time who will regard this state of affairs as very dreadful. But, as I have already pointed out, it has always been the normal condition of life of the Eskimos, who have the reputation of being the most cheerful race on earth. So, as far as concerns the individual, the starving margin would not be in a state of continuous misery, but rather of misery alternating with happiness, which after all is not very far below the state of the rest of the world. For history regarded on the long-term scale, however, these fluctuations of prosperity disappear. Now the fact has to be faced. The fact has to be faced that it will be starvation that limits the numbers of the human race. The effects of overpopulation will be a chief feature to be considered in the later sections of this chapter, but here the question arises of what the total population of the world is likely to be, and the answer is immediate. Whatever food the efforts of mankind may produce, there will always be exactly the right number of people to eat it. It all comes back to Malthus' doctrine and to the fact that an arithmetical progression cannot fight against a geometrical progression. If at any time some discovery, usually an agricultural one, should make a greater supply of food available, then, reckoning on the long-term timescale, instantaneously the population will rise to the new level. And after that, things will go on as before, but now with a larger starving margin in the larger population. It is by no means evident that the world will be any the better for it, but the point is not whether it is a good thing, but whether it will happen, and the answer is that undoubtedly it will. The social sense of any community and its immediate practical interest will not tolerate living in contact with the sufferings of its own starving margin if it is in any way possible to relieve them. The relief will all too frequently involve bad agricultural practice, which will ruin the land in the long run. But short-term necessity will always prevail against long-term prudence. What is the good of telling a man that he must die now for fear that his grandson may be short of food a century hence? That's basically what they want to tell people, isn't it? That is what they're telling people. It goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning about school and what our young people are being taught in school, right? They're being taught sacrifice now because the world is in danger and climate change is going to come and it's going to kill everybody and everyone's going to die in starvation and fear. And you have to not have your holidays and your cars and your steaks and all the nice things that your parents enjoyed and your grandparents enjoy and China and India enjoy, but you can't have those things. You got to have the cheapest, the lowest quality, the most throwaway, trashy, toxic, poisonous products and items. And you better not have any kids, and you better just enjoy a life of indulging your own, chasing your own happiness, being self-centered, being solipsistic. And it's for the good of the future and future generations of people. We don't care about the present people, but to save and protect and benefit the future generations of people, you need to not have children or eat steak or fly in planes. Logic. So, all over the world, there will be immediate pressure to produce more food, and the forecast of the future numbers of mankind is the same thing as the forecast of the future of agriculture. But unfortunately, it will all too often not be the ideally best agriculture. I do not know how far it would be possible at the present time for an agricultural expert to forecast the total amount of food the earth could produce, but I am certainly in no way qualified to do so myself. I shall, therefore, though only very tentatively, set down a few considerations on the subject. In the state of wild nature, animals and plants have learnt to live even in the most unfavourable sites, which they have been driven to occupy through the intense pressure of natural selection. This suggests that the total amount of living matter of all kinds on Earth can never be very different from what it is now. It is true that new ice ages or pluvial periods, which we cannot foretell, might bring rain and therefore fertility to the present deserts of the Earth. But even if there were no compensatory loss of fertility elsewhere, this would hardly even double the area available for life. So it may be assumed that the total living matter of the Earth is roughly constant, and all that man can hope to do is to convert more of it to his own use. This he does by promoting the growth of particular types of plants at the expense of the rest. It does not increase the total amount of living matter, for there must be less vegetable life in a wheat field than in the same field when it is let to run wild. Now, under the pressure of his needs, man has already exploited to a very great extent the more fertile soils in many parts of the world, but he has only succeeded in replacing the wild plants by food plants through the liberal use of fertilizers. There are still no doubt a good many parts of the earth where this has not yet happened. In particular, this is true of the New World, where the pressure on population has not yet become at all severe. But on the whole, to develop further food supplies means devoting inferior lands to agriculture, and such lands will call for an even greater use of fertilizers. So the possibility of greater supplies of food may be assessed by the available supply of fertilizers. Okay. It may then be that the future numbers of humanity will depend on the abundance in the surface of the earth of the chemical elements which are necessary for life. Most of them are abundant enough to raise no difficulty, either because they occur in practically unlimited quantities or because only small quantities are needed. Two only deserve comment: nitrogen and phosphorus. The supply of nitrogen in the air is quite unlimited, but it is not easily available to plants by natural processes, and to supply it in sufficient quantities for agricultural demands a considerable amount of mechanical power. This method of getting nitrogen is of course already common practice, and provided enough work is done to win it, there seems no reason to think that nitrogen need ever run short. The question of phosphorus is far more serious, though less of it is needed. At the present time, it cannot be said to be actually in short supply, though even now it is commercially very profitable to mine fossilized phosphorus deposits, and they are used even in the soils which are naturally fertile. There are great tracts of land, in particular in Africa, which are permanently deficient in phosphorus, and these can never be raised to the fertility of the more favoured regions, unless large quantities of it can be supplied to them. So it may well be that the future numbers of the human race will depend on the abundance of phosphorus in the Earth's surface. I have so far only considered extensions of the methods of ordinary agriculture as the way to increase food supplies, but there remains the possibility that wholly new methods might be discovered. All existing animals depend on the vegetable kingdom for the supply of the constituents of their bodies, but man might aspire to free himself from this limitation. It may well be that someday it will be found possible to synthesize from their component elements some of the exceedingly complicated molecules which make up the important proteins. So he wants to synthesize vegetables in order to make the exceedingly complicated molecules which go into creating proteins. So this is like your plant-based options and Beyond Meat and that sort of thing. The essential first step is to do this on the laboratory scale. But even if this was accomplished, it would be a very different thing to make them in bulk. And it would constitute a problem of chemical engineering very far beyond any that has yet been dreamed of. It is perfectly open to anyone to disagree, but I simply cannot believe that there will ever exist factories capable of turning inorganic materials directly into food, so that they should be able to do it on a scale which could supply the diet of thousands of millions of mankind. Thousands of millions. Cute. Unless it could be done on this scale, it would not have any material effect on the numbers of humanity. There remains the possibility that new types of vegetable should be converted into food fit for man. I have already touched on the possibility that man might someday make grass into an article of human diet, which is in effect only to say that he might discover a more efficient way of eating it than through the medium of beef. But why don't we just go with the beef? We've got enough fields, they're empty, we can fill them with cows, there's no problem at all. But no, we can't do that. I think they got to keep people kind of weak and struggling along with chronic health conditions, with brains that are sort of clouded and foggy and with emotions that are up and down. I was talking in Telegram earlier today with a member of the Hayes Reviews Telegram group, Heidi. I don't think she is here tonight. She's usually on Rumble. But I was talking with her about how it took until I was in my late 20s, early 30s to learn about the effect of blood sugar on mood and regulation, and to realize that I was on this roller coaster of massive blood sugar increases and then crashes afterwards when the insulin kicks in and lowers that blood sugar level. And I was on this journey, and people not realizing that your blood sugar levels are massively influencing your mood, and without regulating those blood sugar levels, then you're blaming a lot of time, reacting to things that are external for things that are going on internally that you have caused by your diet and your lifestyle, right? Your internal state will generate irritability or sadness or anger or whatever, and you blame some external thing. This kind of thing we should be getting in school, again. So, yeah, I don't know. That was my 2 cents on that little bit. Got a couple of comments in there. Frank, let me scroll back and catch that. Let's see. So we had Ashley Stiles saying it was no brainer that the phone led to the mobile phone, that led to the smartphone, that leads to the digital everything. It was inevitable. Art was figuring out how to use it to their advantage. Crop failure, tick, war, tick, disease, tick, says Ashley Stiles. Frank Lennon says he never seems to have considered that the great creator, great enough to have created our reality, must also have a plan of his own to deal with any so-called overpopulation which might occur. Yeah, he doesn't really ever entertain any of that sort of consideration, does he, at all? He's not like Robert Boyle, who was trying to bring theology and metaphysics into the scientific method and marry the two. This guy's just abandoned all the theology and consideration of the spirit and the spirit realm, because he just never even talks about it. He doesn't talk about the soul, doesn't talk about the spirit at all. It's just physical atoms, chemicals, and biological reactions, mechanistic, deterministic, bouncing around randomly and chaotically. Kind of chaotically as well as deterministic. But I think he's kind of more in a deterministic way of looking at it, like it's a mechanism, it's mechanical, and it's inevitable the way it's going to all pan out, right? Frank says he wants to make impossible burgers, yes. Sharmanarchist says Soylent Green, and then Sharmanarchist says shouldn't eat our fellow mammals anyway. Yeah, that's a tough one. That is a really tough one. I'm not going to weigh him. But if we could figure out a way to eat grass, then we wouldn't have to, would we? Anyway, it is to be remembered that the ox has to graze most of the time in order to get enough protein even for its own body. And this shows that only a small fraction of the grass could really be useful to man. The process of directly extracting the protein might be more efficient than making the ox do it, but it would hardly be hundreds of times more efficient. And it is at least possible that when the plant breeder had modified the grass into being rich in proteins, he would find it demanded fertilizers on such a large scale that it would be more profitable to use them instead for growing wheat. A quite different suggestion that has been made is that food supplies could be increased to an enormous extent by the cultivation of the vast areas of the ocean. The prospects do not look good at all. Do not look at all good. We know that every spring the plankton grows so fast that in a few weeks it has stripped the upper layers of the ocean bare of some of the chemical salts needed for life. To get large food supplies out of the sea would therefore demand much more than the mere harvesting of the plankton, though this would itself be a very formidable task indeed. Either it would be necessary to expend an enormous amount of power in churning up the ocean so as to make available the salts from the unimpoverished depths, or else fertilizing chemicals would have to be poured into the sea on a quite fantastic scale. I shall not pursue such conjectures further, since when unmade discoveries are admitted to be possible, the subject becomes so uncertain that it is hardly a profitable field for close argument. Nevertheless, I shall risk saying what appears to be the most probable forecast of the future numbers of mankind, though I need not say I recognize that it may be completely upset by some unforeseen discovery. In view of the fact that it is only the existing vegetable kingdom that can be exploited, I do not believe there will be any revolutionary changes in agriculture, but only steady improvements. The improvements will, so to speak, be described by increases in percentages, not by multiples of the present yields. The world will be covered by a population of the same sort of density as is now found in richer agricultural districts in countries such as China, India, or much of Europe. But, in reckoning this, allowance must be made for differences of climate and of the natural fertility of the soils. In effect, this will mean no great increase in the populations of Europe and Asia. The soils of Africa are, for the most part, not so good, but there is room for some increase there. There should be great increases in the Americas and considerable ones in Australia, and in some of the large Pacific islands. As I have pointed out, short-term necessity is often likely to interfere with really good cultivation. But even if this good cultivation could be assumed, it may be estimated that the population of the world is never likely to be more than about 3 to 5 times its present numbers. Did he get that right? I feel like he might have underestimated it there. So this was written in 1953. Find out what the population was, times it by 5. Maybe that's where we're at. Maybe that is where. Maybe he's actually got it right. Actually, I remember Frank looking up the population in 1953 in an earlier video. 1.2 billion or something, 2 point something billion. Times that by 5, you kind of get into where we're at today. All right, golden ages. The conditions of population pressure must be expected to be the world's normal state, but it is not, of course, a constant state, for there have at intervals been what may be called golden ages, periods when for a time a part of the world could forget about the starving margin. There has tended to be a certain warping in the proportions of history, as given to us by historians, perhaps because it has been chiefly during golden ages that there has been sufficient leisure for anyone to become an historian. At all events, the great histories of the world have been written in such periods. Herodotus, the father of history, wrote during the commercial boom of Athens, Tacitus in the great days of imperial Rome, Gibbon at the height of the 18th century age of reason. And however much they were depicting less favourable times, their views were inevitably coloured by the conditions that they saw round them. Now we are living in, or perhaps at the end of a golden age, which may well prove to have been the greatest golden age of all time. And we too are apt to be warped by the feeling that it is a normal time. Many readers may be shocked at first at the thought that the past century an epoch so often decried for its many faults, should have been the greatest of golden ages, but I think it can be justified. In past golden ages, the prosperity was usually at the expense of other peoples. For example, Rome prospered by looting the East and enslaving the barbarians of the West. Our golden age came about with comparatively little harm to others. It was mainly through mechanical discoveries which made possible transportation on a great scale, so that vast new areas of the world could be opened up for agriculture. It is true that this was done largely at the expense of the American Indian, and his treatment often does not make a pretty story. But still, it was a case of many 100 millions prospering at the expense of a few millions. And so the proportion of suffering inflicted to benefit received must have been far smaller than in most of the previous golden ages. The chief benefit was of course to the white races of the Atlantic seaboard, who for more than a century have been able to forget about their starving margin. But it has by no means been limited to them, for many of the other races have benefited too, as is witnessed by the great increases of population of India and Africa, though in these parts of the world they have not been so easily able to forget their starving margins. We are again becoming very conscious of the world's population problem. But now there are no frontiers or unknown parts of the world into which to expand, and so our golden age is probably near its end. Sharmanicus says, bad arse, lol. Is my legs. They get a bit achy and I have to stretch them out, and that's why I shift around a little bit in my chair. I'm just going to have a sip as well. Throat's getting a bit tickly and sore. But we continue onward. In the future, there will of course be other golden ages, but it can hardly be expected that the balance between good and ill will often be as favourable as it has been in the recent one. It might be that, either by conquest or by commercial exploitation, some region should gain mastery over other regions, to such an extent that it could relieve the starvation of its own margin at their expense. The conquering nation would flourish and call it a golden age, forgetting that its prosperity was at the expense of the peoples it had overcome. It would be very unlike the colonial exploitations of our own age, which, even if they are open to criticism in some ways, have in most cases increased the populations of the colonies. Another possibility that might create a new golden age is that some discovery should make available a vast new source of food, and that, consequently, there would be enough food for perhaps double the previous population of the world. At once, there would be a golden age, but after a very few generations, the result would be even more desperate than before, for there would be a starving margin of people now twice as great. This, in effect, is not unlike what has been happening recently, but the present age has had an advantage, never likely to be repeated, in that it started at a time when the civilized world had frontiers over which it could expand, and now it has abolished all frontiers by expanding over the whole earth. Unless there should be a catastrophe to the world beyond all thinking, it can never contract to such an extent that there would again be frontiers. And it is only if this happens that it could have the chance of again exploiting the vacant places of the earth. So that only under these conditions could there be another golden age, which in any sense would match the present one. So that's kind of a bleak outlook. No more golden ages. It's just all dog eat dog, and might makes right from here on in. We've discovered everything. There's nowhere else to go. We've exploited everything, and so we got to fight over what's left. Science. What's going on now in the chat? All right, you guys are talking about curry. Okay, got it. So this next section is about science. It is the fashion at the present time in some circles to decry the value of scientific discovery and to claim that it is responsible for all our ills. No doubt there was a similar fashion 10,000 years ago to decry agriculture. This view simply will not bear examination. No one would dispute that there are some new troubles in the world which were not foreseen, but they have come about precisely through the successful solution of problems which man has always been trying to solve, though never before with much success. He has always aimed at making a better life by curing disease, by prolonging life, and by enlarging his community so as to better to spread and share the risks of the world. Suddenly, through the methods of science, in particular by the new methods of communication and transportation, and by medical science, he finds that all these aims are achieved, but he discovers that they lead to new troubles he had not the imagination to think of. So now he is blaming those who have done exactly what he asked, because he finds he does not like a few of the consequences, and he forgets that he is all the time receiving benefits out of all proportion to these troubles. The benefits of science which affect the ordinary man directly are due to such things as medical science and the transportation of foodstuffs, together with things like electric light and the telephone or radio, which might be classed rather as luxuries than necessities. These would never have arisen but for the developments of pure science, which is primarily an intellectual pursuit, studied for its own interest rather than for any intention of benefiting humanity. It is fortunate that there are many men who are driven by this purely intellectual urge, for knowledge would never have advanced far if it had only been stimulated by the motive of practical benefit to humanity. It is the pure scientist who has opened up new realms of thought to the rest of the world, and the advance continues. There seem to be no bound to the field of scientific thought, but nevertheless, in an opposite sense, every new discovery does set a bound by excluding alternatives which had before been regarded as admissible. In this second sense, the field narrows. For example, it is not permitted now to doubt the validity of the laws of thermodynamics, laws which were quite unknown little more than a century ago. But this is not the occasion for a technical discussion on the future of the physical sciences, and I will only say that, whatever new ideas may come up, and there is every sign that there will be many of them, there is still plenty of room for improvement inside the known fields. So just a comment there. The second law of thermodynamics, I think, states that everything tends towards entropy, and falling apart. Things degenerate, things disintegrate over the long term. You can fact check me on that. I'm saying that from memory. I think that's right. What the problem with that is that we are told the universe, there was nothing, and then there was an explosion, and then inorganic space debris spontaneously organized itself into complex life form by randomly, chaotically mutating over a long amount of time, which would violate the second law of thermodynamics, which states everything goes towards disintegration and entropy. So I think I'm right in saying this. I'm happy to be corrected if I'm totally off the mark. But the Big Bang model of evolution, macroevolution from space dust and the spontaneous arising of organic life from inorganic space matter due to random, chaotic, unplanned mutation, which Charles Galton Darwin tells us most of the time mutation causes a problem, not an improvement, not an enhancement, right? That whole idea, what I just described, breaks the second law of thermodynamics. And that's one of the arguments against that worldview and that being a possible explanation of our origins. Very happy to be corrected and fact check on that if I buggered it up and got it wrong. Okay. In the hard times to come, it is not to be expected that the remoter speculations of pure science will be pursued as energetically as its practical applications. Excuse me. For example, metallurgy and chemistry will appear more important than astronomy. Unfortunately, there seem great possibilities for development for a long time in these practical senses. Nevertheless, we may confidently expect that there will be some who, like Faraday, still hear the call of pure science, for it is from them that the really great advances will originate. It is in the biological sciences that the most exciting possibilities suggest themselves, perhaps because biology has only recently shown rapid advances like those made earlier in the inorganic sciences. I will only speculate on a few among these possibilities which might have great effects on human life. I have already referred to the possibility of quite new sources of food, and I need not enlarge on that further. Another type of discovery may be connected with hormones, those internal chemical secretions which so largely regulate the operations of the human body. The artificial use of hormones has already been shown to have profound effects on the behavior of animals, and it seems quite possible that hormones, or perhaps drugs, might have similar effects on man. For example, there might be a drug which, without other harmful effects, removed the urgency of sexual desire and so reproduced in humanity the status of workers in a beehive. Maybe. I bet when he says there might be, he's thinking, wouldn't it be really good if? That'd be a wonderful thing to have, wouldn't it? The godson of Francis Galton, celebrated eugenicist, which, if I'm right, it says it on the back cover here. His godfather was Sir Francis Galton, the celebrated eugenicist. Oh, sorry, right there. I don't know who exactly is going around celebrating eugenicists, but there you have it. Definitely following in his godfather's footsteps. And that's one to tab as well, I would say. So yeah, a drug which just removes the sexual impulse, that would be handy. And it could, and here is using that imagery of a beehive again, and an anthill, and sort of saying that seems to be the ideal status that he would like to get humanity to, is that of a colony, some sort of colony, some sort of hive mind colony of humans. And maybe he fancies himself the king, the only fertile one, to sit on his throne and just spend all day impregnating all the fertile females in the hive. I think that's kind of might be his dream. Or there might be another drug that produced a permanent state of contentment in the recipient. After all, alcohol does something like this already, though it has other disadvantages and is only temporary in its effects. A dictator would certainly welcome the compulsory administration of the contentment drug to his subjects. And there he is talking about dictators again. And it's got to be the fourth or fifth time that he's mentioned dictators and what kind of things they would like to see and like to have. So quite a key revelation in that passage. Another possible, though rather remoter, discovery suggests the most curious consequences. This is the control of the relative numbers of the two sexes. It is known that the sex of a child is carried by the sperm, not the ovum, and it is at least imaginable that some method could be found for sorting out those of the sperm cells which carry the male or the female character. It would thus become possible to regulate how many men or women there should be in a population. If such a practice could be developed, it is sure that for a time there would be a great unbalance in populations. A nation with ambitions for conquest would produce a large number of men for its soldiers, but would pay for it by not having enough women to give birth to the soldiers for succeeding generations. On the other hand, just as the stock breeder keeps few bulls and many cows, another nation might decide that it needed few men in order to maintain its numbers. Would such a predominantly female population be able to stand up against a male one, or would a rape of the Sabine women rectify the disproportions? It is clear that the most remarkable effects will be produced if such developments in biological science should come about, and it is impossible to conjecture how they will turn out. And you can bet they are trying to work on this. I bet they are somewhere in a laboratory. I can only record the opinion that in the long run their effects will mainly cancel out for the reason I have developed in an earlier chapter, that man is and will continue to be a wild animal. To produce effects of these kinds, there must be a master, and the master must be above, and not subject to the procedure he is enforcing on his subjects. The dictator could not afford himself to take the contentment drug, because if he did so, his capacity for rule would certainly degenerate. There he is talking, he's always talking about dictators. Like, you got to give the contentment drug, the soma, to the slaves, but you can't take it yourself because you've got dictating to do. Dictators got to dictate, right? It always comes back to the same point, that to carry out any policy systematically in such a way as permanently to influence the human race, there would have to be a master breed of humanity. He's going on about the master breed again. There would have to be a master breed of humanity, not itself exposed to the conditions it is inducing in the rest. And is that what we have? What do you think? Would you say so? I'd say there's a group of people who fancy themselves and would like to call themselves that and become that. I don't think I've been invited to be part of that group. I don't think I would want to be part of that group, even if I was invited. Sounds like it would be a lot of responsibility and stress. And lonely. The master breed, being wild animals, would be subject to all the fashions, tastes, and passions of humanity as we know it, and so would never have the constancy to establish for generation after generation a consistent policy which could materially alter the nature of mankind. In connection with the recent wonderful advances in medical science, this is the place to mention a matter that will very soon indeed be of immediate importance, since in the normal condition of the world, there will be a margin of every population on the verge of starvation. It seems likely that there will have to be a revision of the doctrine of the sanctity of the individual human life. Okay. All right, Charles. A revision of the doctrine of the sanctity of the individual human life. That's pretty wild. In the old days, the doctors were under the obligation of doing all they could to preserve any life, though they had no great success in their efforts. Now it is hardly too much to say that most diseases have come under control, or anyhow, to judge by recent progress, most of them soon will. But is the world the better for having a large number of healthy people dying of starvation, rather than letting them die of malaria? That is a George Bernard Shaw quote, if I ever heard one. It's the kind of thing I can imagine hearing in his accent. There are a huge number of people that I would very much like to kill. So this is the kind of question that keeps a eugenicist up at night, lying in bed, wondering how to bring about the master breed, even though they're prone to self-destruction, wondering how we can generate a drug that will stop the unwashed masses from feeling sexually aroused. I think that might be called television. Or, I don't know, what else could it be? I think they've probably gone after that in a number of different ways. Probably like having access to hardcore pornography in your pocket 24/7. That is another function as well. And all the hormone disrupting chemicals and plastics and additives and things that they put in food, right? But this kind of question, this is what they worry about. This is what they write books about and talk to each other about in secret meetings that we don't get invited to. One of the justified boasts of recent times has been the great decrease that medicine has made in infant mortality. Whereas in the old days, a mother might bear 10 children and have only 2 survive, now she may bear only 3, and she will be regarded as very unlucky if all do not survive. And you can just feel like he probably wrote, whereas in the good old days, a mother might bear 10 and have only 2 survive. And then his editor was like, no, you can't call them the good old days. Just call them the old days. But the difficulty in the world is going to be that the number of people born is too great for the food supply, so that a fraction must die anyhow. May it not be better that they should die in infancy? Shh. Oh, he's asking the hard questions now. This reminds me a little bit of Bill Gates talking about the death panel. Remember that video? That's a death panel, but you're not supposed to have that conversation. I think Gates would have got on well with Galton. The truth is that all our present codes about the sanctity of human life are based on the security of life as it is at present. And once that is gone, they will inevitably be revised, and the revision will probably shock most of our present opinions. That is a hell of a bleak outlook. So yeah, that little section there at the end of the book, science, that's kind of the smoking gun, I think. So page 18. Ooh, sorry, I'm not showing you what I'm looking at. Page 181, this section that begins science and goes on for about 5 or 6 pages and brings us up to page 186. That's kind of the smoking gun. The medicine that he wants to give to people, the questions, he wants to start asking questions. Wouldn't it be better if we just killed them as babies? You know, we've got kind of too many people living too long and they're going to starve anyway. So maybe we just kill them as babies, right? Maybe we just kill them in the womb. Maybe we just make that a human right and call it healthcare and make sure it's available everywhere. And, you know, maybe just saying. Okay, the next section is economics. I've got a really scratchy throat. Excuse me a sec. We're only at 2 hours 16, and I feel like my throat's going to cave in, but we're going to persist and keep going. And I just saw Shaw Manarchist says, that Bernard Shaw dude was such a cretin. And I like that, so I read it out because I really like the word cretin. It's such a great word because it's, you know, it's not an expletive, but you can really get a good bit of force behind it when you say it, and it's got a good ring to it. It's got like the other C word, you know, the one I'm talking about that also has an N and a T in it, because it's got all 3 of those letters, but it's not that word. This is a good one to choose. So yeah, I agree with you. Cretin, indeed. All right, how many pages left? 186 is 209 from memory. Oh, 208 pages. So we got, it's like 22 pages left. Economics. A very great change in world economics is inevitable when the accumulated stocks of coal and oil are exhausted. In the scale of human lives, this will of course be a gradual process, marked by their slowly growing rarer. But on the scale of 1,000,000 years, the crisis is practically with us already. We shall have spent the capital accumulations of hundreds of millions of years, and after that, we shall have to live on our income. Everything depends on whether a substitute can be found which provides power out of income at anything like the rate at which we are now getting it out of capital. In an earlier chapter, I have reviewed the possible sources of energy, with the conclusion that none are going to yield it up easily. The energy is there in sufficient quantity, but it will take an enormous organization to get it into usable form. A very much greater fraction of mankind will be needed to mind the machines than are at present needed to get the coal out of the mines. And there is another difficulty which may arise. If it should prove impracticable to get the energy directly from sunlight, there is the possibility of getting it by the intensive growing of vegetables. say by turning potatoes into industrial alcohol. But if there is always to be a margin of starving humanity, is it not probable that the potatoes will all have to be eaten before ever they are allowed to reach the distilleries? This is like, you know, when you're down the pub with your friends and people come up with these horrific sort of moral situations that you're never going to be in, but you all talk about them anyway. You know, like the train track thing. Would you switch the lever that would put the train onto the other track and kill 3 people instead of instead of the alternative? Is these kind of imaginary moral questions that he's going into now. A necessary condition then for getting energy out of vegetables is that it should be found possible to grow the vegetables under conditions where they do not require soil that might be used directly for food production. To provide energy on the sort of scale to which we are accustomed will call for a very elaborate organization, a great many machines, and a great many people to mind those machines. In view of the short-sightedness and unreliability of human nature, it seems rather unlikely that any process of this kind could be made to work on a worldwide scale for century after century. But it does seem very possible that some part of this plan should be carried out, so that there should be a considerable supplementation to the large amount of energy we already get from water power, which does, of course, provide energy out of income. The general picture of the economic condition of the world, then, is that the chief centers of power production, and so of the most elaborate civilization, will be the regions where there is water power. That is, speaking rather loosely, mountainous regions. It will be these that are the centers of manufacture, and they will exchange their manufactures for the surplus food produced in the agricultural regions. There will also be large power farms in various parts of the world, storing energy either by some direct mechanism or through the intermediary of vegetables. It may be guessed that it will be what I may call the mountaineers, who possess the most readily available energy, who will become dominant. Through their wealth, they will tend to have the highest culture, since culture most easily comes from the leisure created by wealth. It will be they who will tend to rule the world on account of their economic advantages, and, to judge by most past experience, they will be hated by the others for it. There will be the same sort of contest of interests between the mountaineers and the plain-dwelling agriculturalists as there is even now between town and country. Most of the time, the mountaineer will have the advantage, but the farmer, being the food producer, is bound to have the advantage in times of famine, which will not be infrequent. And there will be parts of the world that relapse frankly into barbarism. They will be the less fertile regions which could not produce much food, so that the more civilized people would get no advantage from exploiting them. But there will be other regions which also relapse into barbarism, though the fertility of the soil could support a greater population than it. Though the fertility of the soil could support a greater population than it in fact bears. It is to be expected that such a state of affairs will not usually be tolerated by the civilized countries who will conquer them and export their own starving margins to fill up the vacant places. I can make no claim at all to anything but the most superficial knowledge of the highly technical subject of pure economics. So this reminds me of John Maynard Keynes being raised up to an almost mythical, legendary status, like some sort of incredible mind, some guy who could see things that nobody else could see and understand these complicated systems that nobody else could understand. He's raising the discipline and knowledge of economics up to the level of something that you have to be a master to comprehend and get, when in fact it has all to do very much with where's the money coming from, who's in control of making it, is it backed by anything? That's the part of the conversation that just always seems to be left out. and we're sort of taught that economics is a totally mysterious discipline and science. but also part magic as well. And yeah, they just don't seem to tell us about that very important aspect of it. So similar kind of idea coming from him. Highly technical subject of pure economics. And the following speculations must be read in the light of this defective knowledge. In the economics of exchange, I will not conjecture what sort of medium will be used. The metallurgical value of gold is not very great, and its mystical value is dead, so that it is not to be expected that it will survive. So don't bother hoarding and buying gold. It's not going to lose. It's not going to stay It's not going to stay valuable. You know, God's money cannot be created, lasts forever. It doesn't change. Doesn't oxidize. Forget about that. Its mystical value is dead. Its metallurgical value is not very great. It will not survive. Gold is dead. There you are. You have it from Charles Galton, Darwin. Gold is dead. It would seem that in the long run there is likely to be some uncontrollable medium of value, functioning in the same sort of manner that gold used to do, instead of the present manipulated systems which are so liable to political abuse. Well, at least he admits that the present systems are manipulated and liable to political abuse. Another thing to remember when you're going to put your X in the box. Though no doubt there will be variations through the ages, it is hard to think of anything having a greater simplicity than a monetary system, and therefore presumably that will prevail most of the time. It's quite safe to say there will always be rich and poor. Wealth will be the mark of success, and so the abler people will tend to be found among the wealthy. But there will always be many among them of a far less estimable character. These are the people who are interested not in the work, but only in the reward, and they will all too often succeed at gaining it in a variety of discreditable ways, such as by currying favour with an autocrat. That's the old human nature. As to the less successful members, the standard of living of any community living on its real earnings, as the communities of the future will have to do, is inevitably lower than that of one rapidly spending the savings of hundreds of millions of years as we are doing now. There will also be the frequent threat of starvation, which will operate against the least efficient members of every community with special force, so that it may be expected that the conditions of their work will be much more severe than at present. Even now, we see that a low standard of living in one country has the advantage in competing against a high standard in another, if there is work to be done. And, of two men of equal quality, one is willing to do it for less pay than the other. In the long run, it will be he who gets the work to do. Those who find the bad conditions supportable will be willing to work harder and for less reward. In a broad sense of the term, they are more efficient than the others because they get more done for less pay. There are, of course, many exceptions, for real skill will get its reward, but in the long run, it is inevitable that the lower types of labour will have an exceedingly precarious life. One of the triumphs of our old golden age has been that slavery has been abolished over a great part of the earth. That's a very fun myth that they like to perpetuate. It is difficult to see how this condition can be maintained. Maintained in the hard world of the future with its starving margins, and it is to be feared that all too often a fraction of humanity will have to live in a state which, whatever it may be called, will be indistinguishable from slavery. Yeah, so he's pretty confident about slavery coming back as well. But maybe he'll have a different name. So that'd be good. We'll give it a different name and you won't feel so bad about it. We'll tell you that it's not slavery, even though it looks like slavery and quacks like slavery and walks like slavery. It's not slavery. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Shamanakist says, socialism, right there. Hard work for minimum wages. Okay. Now we're on to the section which is extremely relevant to the day, July the 4th, the day of selection here in the UK. The next section is politics. In the political sphere, it must be recognized that there have always been a great many different forms of government which have shown that they can work in practice, and so it is to be expected that the same will be true in the future. The world will be a sort of museum of different methods of ruling mankind. So no freedom, just continuous methods of ruling mankind. So slavery, in other words. There will be autocracies, oligarchies, bureaucracies, democracies, theocracies, and even peaceful anarchies. Oh, how about that? I didn't expect to see peaceful anarchies in there. We need to find out where those are going to be and head over there. And no doubt each of them will produce a special political philosophy intended to justify its own procedure against all rivals. In such a variety, it is not possible to foresee any detail, and I shall only touch on a few generalities. Whatever forms the government may take, there can be little doubt that the world will spontaneously divide itself into what I shall call provinces. That is to say, regions, though with no permanently fixed boundaries, which possess some homogeneity of climate, character, and interests. I use the same word whether the different provinces are federated together or whether they are what we should now call separate sovereign states. How large will these provinces tend to be? That will depend on the means of communication and transport. And so once again, there arises the question of whether the fuel problem is solved wholly or partially or not at all. In the past, the chief means of communication was the horse, and the countries of Europe are still mostly of a size adapted to suit this almost extinct means of transport, though some of the more newly formed ones do show a trace of the influence of the railway. None of them are really of a size suited to the motor car or the airplane, or to present power production, whether by coal or water power, which cuts right across the national boundaries. If the fuel problem is solved completely, so that mechanical power and transportation is available in the future to a greater extent even than at present, then the provinces will be large. For example, the whole of Europe may well be one, and the whole of North America another. Even if no solution were found to the fuel problem, the world would not revert to its old conditions, because, even if transportation became difficult, intercommunication would still be easy by telegraph. The horse might become important again, and at a guess, the provinces would tend to be about as large as the present countries of Europe. In this case, with its greatly increased future population, North America might be expected to break up into a dozen provinces or so. My own conjecture about fuel has been that something intermediate will happen, in that power supplies will not be as easy as they are now, but that by greatly increased effort they will be brought to something not very far below the present level. In this case, North America might fall into 4 or 5 provinces, and Western Europe into 1 or 2. It is never to be expected that there will be any permanence about the numbers of them or about their boundaries. Consider next what are likely to be usual relations between the provinces. It is too much to expect that there can ever be a permanent world government benevolently treating all of them on a perfect equality. Such an institution could only work during the rare occasions of a worldwide golden age. Oh, that's interesting. So he says there'll never be a permanent world government benevolently treating everyone with perfect equality. To think of it as possible at other times is a misunderstanding of the function of government in any practical sense of the term. If the only things that a government was required to do were what everybody or nearly everybody wanted, there would be no need for the government to exist at all, because the things would be done anyhow. This would be the impracticable ideal of the anarchist. But if there are to be starving margins of population in most parts of the world, mere benevolence cannot suffice. There would inevitably be ill feeling and jealousy between the provinces, with each believing that it was not getting its fair share of the good things, and in fact, it would be like the state of affairs with which we are all too familiar. If, then, there is ever to be a world government, it will have to function as governments do now, in the sense that it will have to coerce a minority, and indeed, it may often be a majority, into doing things they do not want to do. So I was going to make the comment that over here he says we can't have a benevolent world government. We can't have it benevolently treating everyone. But over here he says the only way we can have world government is to coerce a majority into doing things they do not want to do. So maybe rolling up their sleeves for an experimental gene therapy injection, perhaps. Might be one of the things they don't want to do. You get coerced into doing it, you know. Maybe into never taking your children on holiday because you get fined, or never driving your car in London or clean air zones, or, maybe giving up your job because your ancestors were slave owners and you've got to give your job to the descendants of the slaves. But quite an admission that you have to coerce a minority or even a majority into doing things they don't want to do, because that is how he says governments function now. It will have to function as governments do now. It will have to coerce a minority or a majority into doing things they do not want to do. That is how, in Charles Galton Darwin's words, that is how governments function. How about that? Vote harder. In the light of these considerations, it is to be expected that a single government of the earth will not arise very frequently. Most of the time, the provinces will be nearly independent states, which form alliances with one another so as to compete against rival alliances. It will be the old story of power politics again. Now and then a Napoleon may arise and unite some of the stronger provinces, and with their help he may overcome the rest. For a time he will form an unquiet world government, but after a time his dynasty will decay and the world will go back to the condition of the contending provinces. Here again, much depends on the fuel problem. If transportation is easy, world conquest will be easier both for military reasons and because the more uniform culture should make the world government more acceptable. For the government of the separate provinces, it is no use hoping that democracy could often be possible, for the very simple reason that a hungry man will vote for his next meal rather than for reasons of state. Even at the present time, the attempt to import democratic institutions into poverty-stricken countries. I don't know why I stumbled on that one so much. Poverty-stricken countries has been a failure. A necessary condition for democracy is wealth, and the wealth must not be concentrated in too few hands. The lack of this diffusion of wealth is the reason why some rich countries, such as Imperial Rome, failed to give democracy to their peoples. Widespread wealth can never be common in an overcrowded world, and so in most countries of the future, the government will inevitably be autocratic or oligarchic. Some will give good government and some bad, and the goodness or badness will depend much more on the personal merits of the rulers than it does in a more democratic country. Occasionally, through conquest, or perhaps through being first in the field with a new discovery, some region will experience a golden age, and it may, as we ourselves have succeeded in doing, develop for a time a system of true democratic institutions. Interesting that he associates golden age with democratic institutions, isn't it? True democratic institutions. One of the chief instruments of politics is war, so that it is proper to consider what the future of warfare is likely to be. In this, there is a question of the most general importance to be considered first. It is whether the attack or the defense is likely to be the stronger, or, putting it figuratively, whether the cavalry or the infantry is to rule the battlefield. The importance of the question may be seen from past history. After the decay of the Roman Empire, the superiority of the cavalry led to more than 500 years of barbarism in Europe, during which turbulent knights in armour, possessing little merit, but a narrow skill in the use of their arms, could hold the world to ransom. They nearly succeeded in destroying the last surviving vestiges of civilization, and it was only later, through the creation of organized armies, helped by the invention of gunpowder, that the infantry again became the predominant arm. After this, it became unprofitable to conduct aggressive war in the irresponsible manner that had been profitable earlier. And with this change, gradually order and civilization could return to Western Europe. In very recent times, there has been a threat that once again the cavalry, in the form of the tank and the aeroplane, might become superior to the infantry. The danger is by no means over, but the experience of the recent war does suggest, rather contrary to expectations, that the infantry still reigns on the battlefield. However, there is a stronger reason which seems to safeguard the future of civilization from destruction by the cavalry. This is that it calls for a very high pitch of civilization to make a tank or an aeroplane. It is by no means unlikely that at some time or other, one of the world's provinces may establish itself as a military or autocracy and conquer the rest of the world. But to be successful, it would have to be, and to stay, at the peak of civilization. So it seems unlikely that in the future, civilization will be directly destroyed by war, as it was in the Dark Ages. As to what weapons will be used in war, much will of course depend on how far the fuel problem is solved, but perhaps less than in other fields of activity, because armies and navies always claim and usually receive the highest priority in the satisfaction of their demands. It is to be presumed that existing weapons will be improved, that this will be true of both offensive and defensive ones, and that on the whole, in the long run, the improvements will cancel out. It might be thought natural for me to speculate on the future of the atom bomb, but I shall not do so here, as it is too early to form a critical opinion. Whenever a new weapon is invented, a surge of unreasoning horror goes through the world, which has little relation to the weapon's absolute value. This was so at the time of the introduction of gas warfare, which military opinion now tends to regard as an inferior weapon, and though the atom bomb must be accepted as far more important, there has not yet been time to assess it properly. The same is true of the various forms of biological warfare that have been considered, and no doubt there will be other wholly new weapons invented from time to time. All these weapons will increase the destructiveness of war. But it must not be forgotten that at the same time there will also be inventions which increase the recuperative power of the defense. There are two rather different incentives that lead to war. One is fanaticism, the other self-interest. Fanatical wars have been rather rare, and fortunately so, since under the stimulus of a fanatical creed, man is ready to inflict, and also to suffer, brutalities to a degree that would hardly be believed possible by those who do not share the creed. It is to be expected that at intervals there will again be such wars. In an overpopulated world, it is inevitable that there will be a greater callousness about human life, and so it is to be expected that their ferocity will be increased, perhaps even beyond the rather high standard that has been set by the religious wars of the past. Wars stimulated by the milder motive of self-interest may well be more frequent. Here the incentive will often be land hunger, the wish to find land for a province's starving margin at the expense of another province. In view of the cheapened value of human life, there is little likelihood that the hostile population will be treated in a more humane manner than has been the custom in the past. But it will be to the interest of the conqueror to occupy the enemy's land without destroying it. This means that many of the most destructive weapons would not be used, neither the atom bomb, which might make the ground uninhabitable for years, nor biological warfare in any form which might have the effect of making it permanently infertile. This consideration may moderate the evil effects of war to a small extent, but regarded generally, there is no reason to foresee that war in the future will be any less dreadful than it has been in the past. So that's war. Sorry, that's politics. Yeah, interesting. His thoughts on world government. He's actually, it sounds in a lot of cases like he's not he's actually saying not much is going to change, right? Provinces kicking off with each other, scrapping for land and food. He hasn't talked about or foreseen the development of technology and where that would go. That's one thing that I feel like he hasn't touched on so much in the book. The internet, screens, televisions, communicate. He's talked a little bit about communications. Robots, cloning, a lot of scientific developments that he's not got into that people like the Huxleys talked about, or some other futurists and scientific sci-fi type thinkers. I suppose he's trying to be ultra conservative in a way with his predictions. Anyway, let's see what he says about civilization. It will make a fitting end to my essay to consider the future of civilization, whether it will endure, permanently rising to still greater heights, or whether it is destined to decay after a period of efflorescence, as has happened to so many civilizations in the past. Though we should all agree, rather vaguely, as to what we mean by civilization, different people may regard very different aspects of it as the central feature. To some, it may mean principally great developments in art or literature. To others, well-equipped cities and houses. To others, a good system of law. To others, deep learning. And to others, good social conditions. I do not dispute that all or any of these may be involved, but countries could be named, which everyone would concede were civilized, yet which have conspicuously lacked some of these excellences. So, for want of a general definition, the best way I can describe what seems to me to be involved is by citing an example from the past, the civilization of China. China. I don't know why, but I'm not surprised that he's pointing to China as his chosen example of civilization, right? Other people have told us, I think the outcome of the investigation into the foundations was that the goal was to merge the Chinese and the American system. That's the Renee Wormser book, Foundations, Their Power and Influence, and they talk about the Reese Committee hearings? Turned out that the Ford Foundation's goal was to merge the Chinese system with the American system. So it would be a thesis, antithesis, synthesis type thing. So anyway, let's see what he says about Chinese civilization. The Chinese Empire has been civilized for over 3,000 years, and until very recent times has enjoyed a very fair measure of isolation. Broadly speaking, during all that time it has retained the same general characteristics. It has been ruled by a succession of dynasties rising and decaying in turn. During the periods of decay, the provinces have often been practically independent, conducting warfare with one another, until at length a new strong hand has arisen to control them. In its forms of government, it is true that China seems never to have produced anything like European democracy, but this lack is offset by the creation of a highly organized civil service, not merely centuries, but millennia before anything of the kind existed in Europe. All the time, the general character of the civilization has been preserved, now in one place, now in another. Sometimes it has been advanced by important new discoveries, such as the invention of printing. All the time, there has been a liability to famines, which have killed off millions. The perpetual presence of a margin of starving humanity has set a low value on human life, and has made for callousness in regard to the sufferings of the people. This has led to much cruelty, of a kind we are unfamiliar with now, though it could have been matched anywhere in Europe a few centuries ago. There have been golden ages, when the arts have flourished as nowhere else on earth, and deep learning has been achieved, which we only do not reverence so much as do the Chinese, because it has taken rather a different colour from our own. But even in this, we have to concede that the Confucian philosophy has lasted far longer than any of the philosophies of the West. It would seem that in its constancy of character, both in its virtues and in its defects, the Chinese civilization is to be accepted as the model type of a civilization to a greater degree than any of the other civilizations of the world. In the manner in which it has retained its individual character permanently, The Chinese civilization seems preeminent, but of course others too have survived for quite long periods. The Roman civilization, though it died in the West, was preserved in a modified form for nearly 1,000 years longer in the East. In the same loose sense, the Mesopotamian civilization was preserved by the Arabs at Baghdad until it was overthrown by the Turks, and even so it survived in Egypt and in Spain. There have not been a great many different civilizations in all, so that it is not very safe to generalize. But admitting that some have disappeared leaving no heirs, still the general conclusion must be that in the main there has been at least some survival, if not in the place of origin, then elsewhere. However, that may be, our present civilization is in an incomparably stronger position, for it is dominated by the scientific revolution, which, as I have tried to show, makes it basically different from all previous civilizations. The scientific revolution has introduced ways of thinking which can claim a quality of universality because they are objective and nearly independent of aesthetic tastes. Even now, the community of scientists is quite international. Excuse me a second. Just have a sip. A sip and a cough, but we're in the last 8 pages now, so we're getting there. So that they can discuss together the matters that concern them without any thought of national or racial differences. This has never been true of ideas in art, philosophy, or religion. For example, the learned of Europe and the learned of China each reverence their own classical literature profoundly, but neither values very highly the classics of the other. Whereas in their own subject, the scientists of the whole world cannot help valuing the same things. If he is thinking, say, about an electric current, an educated Central African will go through the same process of thought as an educated Englishman, and no difference in their aesthetic tastes will make any difference between them in this. So he's kind of saying that the scientific revolution and science is like the great leveler because it disregards culture, traditions, religions, spirituality, spiritual practices, racial differences. All that goes out the window, and everyone can be united by science. So it's the ultimate religion to unite peoples and get them living under a one world government. Even though he says, well, no, he said a benevolent one world government wouldn't happen, but he said a one world government which coerced people into doing things they didn't want to do would be possible. And I think the banner under which that would happen is, science. Believe in the science, trust in the science. The scientific revolution has changed the world materially in innumerable ways, but perhaps the most important of all is that it has provided a universality in methods of thought that was wanting before. So there is an even stronger reason to believe that the new culture cannot die than ever held for any of the old civilizations. It has only got to survive in one part of the earth for it to be recoverable everywhere. Even the old civilizations survived for the most part, and it can be regarded as certain that the new culture will be inextinguishable. A much more difficult question to answer is the question whether civilization will be retained within the same races, or whether there will have to be a perpetual renewal from more barbaric sources. Western Europe, which largely provided the barbarians who recreated the Roman civilization, is itself at the present time in imminent danger of committing suicide. And he was saying this back in 1953. That's quite... I don't know. I think we'll see, particularly when we get onto the Owen Ratu book, the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. I think we'll see that he was right on the money, and that could be written in the present day. But yeah. So, moving on. Must civilization always lead to the limitation of families and consequent decay, and then replacement from barbaric sources, which in turn will go through the same experience? The new developments in birth control make the threat a great deal more formidable, but in the long run, I do not think that it is to be feared. There are already many people with a natural instinctive wish for children, and this wish is sometimes strong enough to outweigh the economic disadvantage which undoubtedly at present attaches to having a family. Such people will tend to have larger families than the rest, and in doing so, will at least, to some extent, hand on the same instinctive wish to a greater number of the next generation. As I have already argued, the limitation of population is an unstable process, which cannot persist. It is very conjectural how long the transformation will take, but as the change that is needed in the balance of human sentiments is very slight, it seems likely that the new balance will not take very long to be established, perhaps thousands of years, but not hundreds of thousands. The first nation or race which can keep its civilization and at the same time superimpose on it this change in the balance of instincts will have the advantage over all others, both the civilized races that lack the instinct and the barbarians who have not needed it for their survival. This nation will, in consequence, dominate the world. In the establishment of permanently civilized races, the most important control will be this small change in the balance of human instincts, because it will have become inherent in the race's nature, and it will not need to be taught to each succeeding generation. But it will be helped, and might be much accelerated, if creeds should arise working in the same direction. In the history of mankind, creeds will continue to be of very great importance. Among the most important, there will always be the creeds which, without undue fanaticism, inculcate a strong sense of social obligation, since it is only through such creeds that life is possible in crowded communities. So that's your socialism there, your communitarianism. There will also, no doubt, often be fanatical creeds to disturb the peace of the world, and there will be others to comfort the world. I shall not attempt to conjecture what the tenets of these last will be. Their main function is to act as a solace to their believers in the very bleak world I have described. It is only this that makes the world tolerable for many people, and this will be much more true in times of real hardship than in periods of relatively easy prosperity like the present. The detailed march of history will depend a great deal on the creeds held by the various branches of the human race. It cannot be presumed with any confidence that purely superstitious creeds will always be rejected by civilized communities, in view of the extraordinary credulity shown, even now, by many reputedly educated people. It is true that there may not be many at the present time whose actions are guided by an inspection of the entrails of a sacrificial bull, but the progress has not been very great, for there are still many believers in palmistry or astrology. It is to be expected, then, that in the future, as in the past, there will be superstitions which will notably affect the course of history, and some of them, such as ancestor worship, will have direct effects on the development of the human species. But superstitious creeds will hardly be held by the highly intelligent, and it is precisely the creed of these that matters. Is it possible that there should arise a eugenic creed, which, perhaps working through what I have called the method of unconscious selection, should concern itself with the improvement of the inherent nature of man, instead of resting content with merely giving him good but impermanent acquired characters? Without such a creed, man's nature will only be changed through the blind operation of natural selection. With it, he might aspire to do something towards really changing his destiny. So what he's saying is we would like to have a eugenic creed. If we want to change our destiny from this story that he's laying out, then we want to develop a eugenic creed. He says up here, is it possible? Is it possible that there should arise a eugenic creed? And because if we don't have it, we're not going to be able to change our destiny. So that's pretty crazy. But I think back then, eugenics and eugenicists, this is when it was still acceptable, socially acceptable to say it and talk about it. And in fact, it was the cool thing. It was in vogue, Oh, I just saw we got BHX1138 over on Odyssey saying China is the model even in 1953. Yeah, welcome to stream, and thank you for the comment. I think you're absolutely right there. I was surprised that he picked China, but he's going to tell us why now. To conclude, I have cited the past history of China as furnishing the type of an enduring civilization. It seems to provide a model to which the future history of the world may be expected broadly to conform. The scale will, of course, be altogether vaster, and the variety of happenings cannot by any means be foreseen. But I believe that the underlying ground theme can be foreseen, and that, in a general way, it will be rather like the history of the Chinese Empire. The regions of the world will fall into provinces of ever-changing extent, which most of the time will be competing against one another. Occasionally, more rarely than has been the case in China, they will be united by some strong arm into an uneasy world government, which will endure for a period until it falls by the inevitable decay that finally destroys all dynasties. That's your second law of thermodynamics, by the way. The inevitable decay. There will be periods when some of the provinces relapse into barbarism, but all the time civilization will survive in some of them. It will survive because it will be based on a single universal culture, derived from the understanding of science. For it is only through this understanding that the multitudes can continue to live. On this basic culture, there will be overlaid other cultures, often possessing a greater emotional appeal, which will vary according to climate and race from one province to another. Most of the time, and over most of the earth, there will be severe pressure from excess populations, and there will be periodic famines. There will be a consequent callousness about the value of the individual's life, and often there will be cruelty to a degree of which we do not willingly think. This, however, is only one side of the history. On the other side, there will be vast stores of learning, far beyond anything we can now imagine, and the intellectual stature of man will rise to even higher levels. So notice that's the intellectual stature, not the moral stature, not the philosophical stature, but the intellectual stature. And sometimes new discoveries will for a time relieve the human race from its fears, and there will be golden ages when man may for a time be free to create wonderful flowerings in science, philosophy, and the arts. Also, philosophy and the arts do get a little mention there on the last sentence of the book. So that's good. I'm just going to tab up this previous page where he talks about a eugenic creed. It's a pretty key part, I think, to what he's laying out. So we need like a sort of scientific eugenics to steer things in a better direction. It's kind of what he's saying, isn't it? We need a special breed. We need a master breed to decide who gets to mate and who doesn't, and who gets to reproduce. And we also need a scientism, a kind of religion of scientism, and we need a eugenic creed to allow all that to happen, and obviously give most of the working class drugs so that they feel happy about this situation. Okay. What we got going on in the chat? Oh, it's been pretty active. Thank you, everyone. Frank and Shamanicist and Bitcoin mining. I can't read all this out and catch up on it, but I liked Trevor McDonald's comment. Let's all be slaves. Woo! Yeah. Oh, Hasdak's here as well. Good evening, Trevor and Hasdak. Good to have you here. Hasdak said now it's drone wars. Yeah. I don't think he saw the use of robots, or he wasn't on his mind, or he didn't care about that to predict anything about that. Technology doesn't seem to be something he's bothered about mentioning in this book. He seems more concerned with the genetics and the eugenics and the condition of humanity in terms of our intellectual ability. Interesting that he's throwing in the value of life out the window. That's got to go down. That's got to go. That's like, it reminds me of Yuval Harari. The era of free will, that's over. Like the era of individuals, the sanctity of individual life, that's over. That sounds like to me what he's saying. Yeah. The Shamanarchist, was that about China, the longest continuous civilization of Earth, all on 2 bowls of rice a day and the odd fried dog. All right. We'll do the epilogue, and then we are out of here. This is only going to be, it's just like 3-4 pages, if that. So let's do this and wrap it up. So this is epilogue, chapter 11. Can we do anything about it? Can we do anything about it all? The picture I have drawn of the future that humanity may expect is certainly very different from the hopes of the optimistic idealists of the past and the present. Such people may argue that many unforeseen, wonderful things have happened in the past, and that it is idle to speculate about what other wonderful things the future may hold in store. They are forgetting that we are living in an entirely exceptional period, the age of the scientific revolution. I have called it a golden age, and I would remind them that during the course of history, man has assigned the epoch of the golden age at least as often to the past as to the future. Excuse me. Anyone who disagrees with my forecast must try to get beyond a vague optimism, which merely expresses the confidence that something will turn up. In particular, he must find a really solid reason which shows how the threat of overpopulation will be avoided. The observation that it has been avoided in some countries during the last few years is not enough. Let him then give the fullest rein to his imagination. Let him suppose that anything is permissible, but let him follow out the consequences to their conclusion. I will venture to say that if he does so, he will find that one or other of 2 alternatives is the result. Either he will come to general conclusions not so very different from mine. He will find that his utopia, however pleasant it may be in other ways, in the long run will suffer from many disagreeable features of the kind that I have been considering, or else he will find that his imagination has gone so far out of the realms of reality that it contradicts the physical or the biological laws of nature. Nevertheless, for all of us, it is intolerable to think of a future unfolding itself in complete predestined inevitability for the eternity of 1,000,000 years. There are 2 things we must do. One is to know, the other to act. As to knowing, in my introductory chapter I described an analogy in mechanics, and I suggested that it should be possible to discover a set of laws, like the laws of thermodynamics, which would place absolute limits on what can be done by humanity. Biological laws cannot be expected to have the same hard outline as physical laws, but still there are absolute laws limiting what an animal can do, and similar laws will limit man not only on his physical side, but also on his intellectual side. If these could be clearly stated, we should recognize that many attempts that have been made at improving man's estate were hopeless. It is for others, better versed than I am in the biological sciences, to work out these laws, and it is in all humility that I put forward the basis on which it may be that they could be founded. The first principle is that man, as an animal, obeys the law of variation of species, which condemns human nature to stay nearly constant for 1,000,000 years. The perfectibility of mankind, the aim of so many noble spirits, is foredoomed by this principle. The second is that man is a wild animal, and that doctrines drawn from the observation of domestic animals are quite inapplicable to him. The third principle is the non-inheritance of acquired characters, a principle familiar in animal biology, but all too seldom invoked in connection with human beings. If these and any further principles as well, or any alternatives to them, were accepted, it might sometimes be possible through them to show up the absurdities of bad statesmanship, and certainly it would be the part of a wise statesman to work within their limitations, because only so could he hope to achieve success. What action can be taken about the future of the human race? I am afraid that the answer must be very little indeed. And this is for the simple reason that most human beings do not care in the least about the distant future. Most care about the conditions that will affect their children and their grandchildren, but beyond that, the situation seems too unreal. And even for those who do think about the more distant future, the uncertainties are too great to suggest any clear course of action. For example, consider the inevitable fuel shortage that is to come so soon. I know that my sons will not suffer from it very seriously, and I know that the 15th generation of my descendants will get no coal at all. Am I likely to refrain from putting coal on the fire on a cold evening by the thought that it may make one of my 14th descendants suffer for it? Such matters are so unreal to our minds that it is not to be expected that they will ever be given much weight. Life is always precarious, and it is so hard to be sure of keeping alive for even 10 years that it is not surprising that no one should care much about what is going to happen even as short a time ahead as a century. In hardly any of the affairs of the world will man really be interested in the more distant future. Still, for the sake of the distant future, something can be attempted more profitable than has been usual hitherto. Attempts at improving the lot of mankind have all hitherto been directed towards improving his conditions, but not his nature, and as soon as the conditions lapse, all is lost. The only hope is to use our knowledge of biology in such a way that all would not be lost with the lapse of the conditions. The principles of heredity offer an anchor which will permanently fix any gains that there may be in the quality of mankind. In final conclusion, I had better declare my personal inclination. I do care very much about the future of the world, and I want most intensely my own descendants to play their part in it. However bleak the future, I am not content with the thought that it should be a world in which I have had no continuing part. No matter whether in the long ages to come, life is to be a joy or a misery, and certainly much of it will be a misery, it will be an adventure that is well worth while. That is The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin. A brilliant insight into the future and revealing forecast of things to come. And I haven't said this yet on this series of videos, but H.G. Wells also wrote a novel called The Shape of Things to Come. So just something to bear in mind, a little echo there, Things to Come on the subtitle of this book, H.G. Wells writing A Shape of Things to Come. I don't know if it was made into a film as well, I'm not sure. All right, we're done. Another book, polished off. Only 5 videos. Only 5 videos. So, thank you very much for hanging in there with me on that one. Thoughts? It wasn't quite as revealing as I thought it might be. He was kind of cautious and conservative with his predictions, very speaking in generalisms. He didn't really seem to be speaking on behalf of any shadowy cabal who were planning on really rolling out these things he mentioned. But he did, I think it's a really valuable insight into the mindset of this type of person, the class of people who want to be the scientific elite, the technocratic elite, call themselves elite, but they're not really. A very good insight into the way they look at things. Man is an animal. Can we change the nature of man? Can we do it with drugs? Food's going to run out. There's ecological problems. There's fuel problems. Overpopulation, obviously. This is a massive piece of overpopulation propaganda. And humanity is a kind of, to me, sounded like his idea and description of humanity is that we're a sort of plague of locusts, just consuming and consuming until it runs out and then we all die. Like there's no free will, there's no restraint, There's no ability to plan and to delay gratification for a future benefit. He didn't have a very nuanced view, and he didn't go into the complexities of human behavior, what we are capable of, the potentials that we can reach. He painted but he did say he was only really dealing with averages, because anyone outside, above or below the average, so what? You don't really matter, because it's just the averages that dictate what happens over the long run. So pretty coherent. I understand his arguments. They made logical sense to me, but I think it suffers from what is it called? The neglected aspect. I think a lot of aspects of human nature, of spirituality, of the soul, of metaphysics, all this stuff just left out, just chucked out. And he was like, scientism will unite us all. And scientism, even if it is extinguished, it will be kept alive somewhere on one corner of the planet, and it will spread out again. And through scientism, we can erase all these differences between people and homogenize the cultures and the nations of Earth and get everybody thinking the same, behaving the same, and acting the same, like an ant colony, like a beehive. So a lot of tells in the imagery that he chose to use, and the symbols and the metaphors and the analogies that he employed to back up his thinking and his analysis. So it's kind of my thought. Not quite as revelatory and mind-blowing as I expected, but still a really good artifact, and I'm very glad I've got it in my library. 1953. It's a good insight into the window and the mentality of the managerial elite. And also, I think it captures an era, a time when eugenics wasn't such a taboo thing to talk about. Now that we've gotten rid of eugenics, and that's not happening anywhere in the world, is it? Because we got rid of that back in the 40s, even though this is from 1953. I think it's a good artifact that shows eugenics was widely spoken of and talked about, and it was celebrated, and it was cool thing to be into, and it wasn't a problem, and you were kind of considered more intellectually developed if you were into it and you talked about it. And for him to openly call for a eugenic creed, it's a good artifact to show people and refer to when you're charting the history of that mentality, I would say. So, I'm happy we went through it. What have you got in the chat? We've got Sharmanicus saying, cheers, Nick. Take care, everyone. Take it easy, sir. Thank you for being here. Frank Lennon says, thanks, Nick. Great overall read. Thank you for hanging out and sticking through it. We got Gwen saying, very interesting read. Can't say I like the author, though. He comes across as quite cold. I agree. He was very clinical, very cold, didn't seem to have much emotion, didn't seem to have much sympathy, didn't seem to have much compassion, didn't seem to have much sensitivity for the human condition, for the situations that he was describing. Just like loads of people are going to die, loads of people are going to be hungry, governments are going to have to coerce people like they always do. Maybe we can drug them to make them feel better. Discontent is a more useful thing because it motivates people. So the politicians can make sure people feel discontent, So yeah, it doesn't read like someone who's on our side. Let's put it that way. All right. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm starting to get very sleepy. And what is the plan? The plan is The Fearful Master by G. Edward Griffin. That's next. Now, look at this. Look at the size of this book. It's a tiny little thing. It's a really tiny, slight little paperback. It's barely the size of my hand. And what we're looking at here, we're looking at about similar length, just a bit longer than Next Million Years, about 236 pages. It's never been read. You can tell because the spine here is in such good condition, just flat. And when I open it, I can tell that we're going to have to really, to get into these pages, we're going to have to properly spread it out and just ruin and crease all that edge when we read it. But read it we shall. And I think it's going to be incredibly instructive and quite fascinating. And it has all sorts of, and this is well referenced, like this page, for example, you can see down there. At the very bottom, it's got 4 footnotes on it. So we're going to have references and footnotes for G. Edward Griffin. We've even got pictures. So it's going to be interesting to look at these artifacts. Pictures to back it up. So that's going to be a good one to get into, and we are going to start that. Let me see. When can we start it? Can we start it this weekend? I don't think I have any plans on Saturday night, but let me double check. Yeah, we can start on Saturday night, in fact. Let's get started. So we'll crack on with our next book in the series, which is going to be The Fearful Master, a second look at the United Nations by G. Edward Griffin. That's going to be very exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. G. Edward Griffin is an absolute inspiration and OG in the conspiracy research, truth-telling, how the world really works type of world. So it's going to be instructive, to say the least. So I'm going to bow out for now. I wish you all the best. Trevor, LJ, Gwen, I can see your names in the chat. I hope you're doing all right. Take care of yourselves and each other, as always. And we'll be back Thursday night with The Fearful Master. So keep an eye out for that. I think that's all I got to say right now. So God bless. you.